Once the wind gently swayed the trees, lifting torn leaves from them, birds flew up into the sky, and in this silence the main character reflected that his goal was to live carefree. Leisure is very important for a person and they have always valued it, so always give a maximum of 60–80% of your capabilities, but if you truly try only in 10% of cases, it is a waste of time. Because the hero worked very hard, he finally got a 16-day paid vacation, decided to spend it properly and went abroad, where he visited a famous restaurant. The bus, which until then was calmly driving on the cobblestones, went off route due to a pothole in the road. The driver carefully turned the steering wheel, and the boy walking with a tablet in his hand swayed back and forth. People busy with their own affairs stopped to look at the overturned bus, which with its body broke part of the stone road. Thus ended the short life of the man, or so it seemed to him. After some time, before the eyes of the boy who was just hit by the bus, a beautiful landscape appeared, and sun rays pierced through the clouds. Such surroundings confused him. He did not know where he was, what was happening around, and why he woke up exactly here, since not long ago he had definitely died under the weight of the bus. In a space completely surrounded by clouds, before the boy appeared a solar halo, in the center of which stood the image of a woman, and probably the voice asking if he was not asleep belonged to her. The soul of the deceased wondered who stood before him, but his thoughts were confirmed by the girl herself, saying that she was an observer and watches over the galaxy. Or, as she was more often called, the goddess. The soul asked why she was here. Confirmation of his death came immediately, but the goddess said that the dead are given 3 options for further development. The first option, the soul goes to heaven. The second, returns to earth in another body. The third, is reborn in another world. Although the soul was confused, the goddess herself was clearly in too much of a hurry, and this caused some reflection. The voice in her head made the girl smile and agree, for she could be a bit impatient. The deceased soul asked the goddess if she could answer her question, and received consent, for she stood before the goddess. Then the soul decided to find out what other world awaited it if it chose the third option. The goddess smiled and began the story. Artoria is a fantastic world rich in natural resources, featuring 108 treasure labyrinths where groups can go for exciting adventures. When residents turn 5 years old, they are baptized and receive special abilities and blessings, but it is not that simple. The world is inhabited by dangerous monsters, and there is class inequality. Having listened to the goddess of the soul, I realized that in a previous life he went to look for a new hobby. If he was reincarnated in the same world, he would hardly find anything, so the soul informed the goddess that he would go to another world. Spreading her arms, the goddess smiled softly again, accepted the choice of the deceased soul, and said that she could endow her with any abilities and any power the soul desired. But the spirit refused such a generous offer, because special power would cause unnecessary conflicts and envy, and he did not need it. But he did not refuse a healthy body. With these words, the spirit surprised the goddess. After their conversation, the soul wondered if the goddess always communicates with souls, to which the goddess clearly replied that she does so very rarely. This soul was an exception because when she was 5 years old, she saved a kitten that was her descendant, and the goddess decided to personally thank the rescuer. Understanding the story about the goddess of the soul, she noted that many people are mistaken in saying that compassion does not benefit others. Smiling slightly, the goddess hoped that he would no longer hold this judgment. Reaching out to the shapeless light that embodied the soul of the deceased, the goddess wished her a happy and bright life. After some time, the clouds in the sky dispersed. Outside it was very beautiful. Sun rays illuminated a small village with fields. The wind gently swayed the trees around the small stone house with windows closed by wooden shutters, and inside a man and a woman leaned over a child's bed. The beautiful girl smiled widely and said good morning to the baby lying before her, not forgetting to say how she felt. But the bearded man, who called himself the child's father, called the son cute. The boy stood with his mouth agape and looked at the new parents he saw when he opened his eyes. The smile on his face was a bit awkward and uncertain. Delighted by his son's awkward smile, Imria crossed her arms over her chest and asked Lark to take her son in his arms. The man did not object and said that his son would grow up as strong as he was. While the parents rejoiced at his behavior, a thought spun in his head as if he had woken up like a baby, and although it seemed logical, the lack of control over his body clearly troubled him. In the small house standing alone by the beaten path in the forest, the joyful laughter of a happy family rang out. In this world, a soul that died was born under the name All. The baby's body is governed by instincts. When hunger prevails, it begins to cry without thinking. If tired or full, it usually falls asleep. Being a baby is not easy. The baby's mother was named Impriya. She was beautiful with an angelic face, but probably all mothers seem the most beautiful. The father was called Lark. He was not very smart, but better than a tyrant. After spending several days in the new body, Azul learned that his family were farmers, and due to a good harvest, they would soon live peacefully. It also became known that in Archeria, farmers are usually considered poor. But the most important thing the boy learned about this was very recent. One evening, the attention of the whole village was drawn by my mother's voice, who said that it was already getting dark. Imria stretched out her hands in front of her, said light, and a small snow-white ball appeared in her palms. The soul carefully watched the happy parents smiling after a successful spell that now lit up the whole house. That was the most important thing. In this world, there is magic. At the head of the village appeared mages in the form of a woman or a man, with a pointed hat on their head and a magic orb in their hands, and if he could not use magic, then reincarnation made no sense. Frowning and looking displeased at the burning orb of light, the wool began to think about how to activate magic. He urgently had to try to summon something. It was necessary to think about it. To use magic, a person must have some resource, but now he did not need to know exactly what it was. It was enough to feel it within himself. Unexpectedly, due to a strong and probably too intense process of thinking, the infant's body could not withstand such pressure, and the village immediately fell asleep. After some time, the village had already experienced many destructive mistakes. As soon as he concentrated, he was immediately shut down. But the body's first tasks are sleep and food, yet the village was not going to give up. Focusing, he began to search for energy for magic and finally found it. A small ball of energy appeared in the center of the abdomen, and although it was small, the villagers felt it. At that moment, the boy realized that now he could use this energy for magic, and to do this, he only needed to redirect it. But one detail ruined the village's brilliant plans. His body wanted to sleep. The seasons changed one after another. Winter became spring. 6 months had passed since he was born in the new world, but all this time the boy only ate, slept, and practiced magic, so he had not yet become an adult. Practice still bore fruit. Although the soul cannot use magic, he learned to feel it throughout his body, and this is very exhausting, but it was already progress. The best time to practice. Deciding to take as an example how his mother casts the spell light, the soul focused and quietly spoke it. Unfortunately, the child's body could not withstand the tension and simply reacted, causing the baby to blush. The mother from the village smiled happily and came to help her son change his diaper. It was expected that nothing would work out, but the boy did not think it would be easy, so he decided that since he had a lot of time, he would just continue in the same spirit and not give up. Morning, day, evening, night. The girl tried to use the light spell, but nothing worked. The boy did not understand why nothing succeeded, so he decided not to imitate his mother and simply imagined a brighter light, like from an LED lamp. The answer was close enough. The boy did not need to copy his mother. It was enough for him to imagine how an object from his past life performs the necessary actions. Perhaps he was not the only one with such an ability to deceive. But that no longer mattered. Now he could use magic. The tool smiled and raised a small fist in a gesture of victory. Now the little village only had to practice. If he practiced, the magic reserve should also increase. Imagining the action of a cooler in the child's hands, a small storm arose. Even if he began to understand how his magical abilities worked, he still needed to do something first. The little village stretched, yawned, and slowly fell asleep. After all, he was only a baby. The baby's mother entered the room and noticed that it was suspiciously cool there. 5 years passed, the little village noticeably grew, and his mother and father eagerly prepared for his baptism. Such an event is hard to forget. Cheerfully waving to his parents, the soul said goodbye and set off on a journey, and today all children who have reached 5 years old will undergo the baptism ceremony, which was a kind of greeting and acceptance of God's mercy. In this world, blessings literally determine people's fate, and among the variety of gifts, one can receive both weak power and such a strong one that with its help a country can be created from scratch. However, the tool believed that any blessing was not useless, but rather a pleasant bonus in everyday life, so the boy was not very worried, and all this reminded him of gacha games from his world. A short girl with a warm smile greeted the people in the village. It was Murai, one of the main hero's first childhood friends who lived nearby. Although she was a year older, to the people in the village she was like a younger sister. They played together 3 times a week, and now, when they meet, they smile at each other and hold hands. The children stood not far from the local church and talked about how today was finally the day of the village's baptism, which he had waited for a very long time. As it turned out, Muri came not just to meet the boy, but to tell him something important, and this surprised the village a little. A childhood friend advised him not to tell anyone about his gift. The village already knew about it, but after laughing with the girl, he said he did not know, as if it was not worth talking about. Deciding to continue the game about Nezneka, the boy asked why it was impossible to talk about his blessing. Most likely, Mir was not ready for such a question because she herself probably did not know why. Even more embarrassed by the unexpected question, the girl shouted that she could not, and that was it. The reasons were simple. To avoid shame or excessive pride among the children, they decided not to talk about their abilities. It was still warm and sunny outside, and the baptism was taking place in the small church. The priest stood by the altar, and before him the soul knelt on one knee. Rising from his knees after the greeting, the boy with blonde hair raised his head to the priest, who hoped that he was ready for the ritual, and the villagers asked him to begin. Raising his hand to the boy's head, the priest said that the Creator's mercy be with him, and his hand was flooded with a bright glow. A small part of the village was flooded with bright light. It seemed that every part of his body was filled with an unknown power. His body was still enveloped in a bright glow, and the boy felt the power spreading throughout his body and thought that this might be a blessing. Closing his eyes, everyone tried to focus on the new sensations. He saw the name of his ability. It manifested in his consciousness. Suddenly the word moderation came to my mind. A silent question froze on his face. He was embarrassed. He wanted to ask the priest, but remembered that no one was allowed to speak about the blessing. The blessing that the hero received was more related to his previous life. These thoughts caused a cold feeling in him that perhaps God hated him. Tears rolled down the blonde's cheeks. The boy thought that everyone would be grateful for such a gift, but only the sweat of his heart flowed from his eyes. Only with years did he understand how useful his tears were. Happily returning home, the soul first decided to inform his parents that he had finally received the blessing. When his parents met their son with joyful smiles, they decided to prepare a festive dinner in honor of this joyful event. Sitting down, Lark adjusted his son's cap and told him to remember that every gift is useful in its own way. Smiling, the father said that whatever gift his son received, the son should be proud of this gift, but for some reason these words sounded like consolation for the village. After some time, a flock of birds flew over the treetops behind which rocky mountains were hidden, and in the very center of the forest sat a short boy. Focusing on his feelings, a lump of magical power appeared in the boy's hands, which after the words wind ball shattered the tree before his eyes. The soul, satisfied with the result, realized that he had finally added the magic of wind to his achievements alongside the magic of fire, water, space, lightning, earth, and ice. Looking at the tree fragments after the magic, the boy reported that his magic had become much stronger, and now he got tired much less from using it. After all, his training since early childhood was not in vain. Satisfied with the achieved results, one spirit was not going to stop there, and decided to continue training with the magic that he needed for a perfect life. The boy thought for a long time about what he could compare the feature he needed to, then he remembered his waste bag. All he had to do was imagine it. After concentrating and saying, "Place for items," a crack appeared in front of the village, inside which it was empty. Rejoicing at the unexpected but successful result, the boy decided to check the gap and inserted a stick, which immediately disappeared as soon as it touched it. The work was done perfectly. Now our hero had a hideout where time passed differently, and the things stored there would always be fresh. Returning home after a fruitful workout in the village, I found a generously set table with many dishes. There were buns, meat, and of course, vegetables. Such an amount of food amazed the boy, and his mother said that today for lunch they have well-fried meat, so he can eat as much as he wants. Krinichny bird is a weak monster that lives everywhere, but it takes at least 3 to handle it, and farmers highly value its meat because it tastes like chicken. A year ago, the boy shared the recipe for this meat with his mother. He just asked if it would be tastier if the meat was coated in breadcrumbs and then fried in oil, and his mother successfully cooked it perfectly on the first try. Unfortunately, in this world there were no seasonings like soy sauce, only salt, and although Adjul could not taste his favorite chicken, he decided to create all these seasonings here. In the house where our hero lived, there was always freshly baked bread and vegetables because his family grew them, so these products were always filled with love. If the buns are made with homemade yeast, Emery promised that when her son brings his bride home, she will teach her how to bake their family bread. Starting to eat, the father and son almost simultaneously began praising the cooking skills of their wife and mother, which made her a little embarrassed, and she suggested adding some spices. In the village house, laughter and joy always prevailed, and today was no exception. After dinner, the boy flopped onto the bed and cried that even though he is growing, he still needs to know his limits. If he could use magic that activates cells, removes malignant substances, and cures diseases. Healing. After casting the spell, the heaviness in the stomach disappeared as if he had been in hot springs, and after that, it was possible to go to sleep. The village had not fully fallen asleep. he heard the anxious conversations of the parents about how this year, due to crop diseases, it might be difficult for them. Behind the door, the worried voices of the parents continued, discussing how to survive this winter. Nala's father decided to hunt monsters to earn money for the winter, and it was a very dangerous idea. Imria anxiously lowered her head and asked the man what would happen to them if he did not return from the hunt one day. The next morning the villagers went out to the field and grew bored with their thoughts, but children should not listen to such conversations because they will understand nothing, yet this did not mean that the boy would be passive. Recalling yesterday's spell, the blonde decided to try applying it to the wheat sprouts, and his body, covered with these sprouts, was covered with a soft light after the spell. Slightly confused by the name, the villager noted that there was no point in thinking about it. Although he was not sure he would succeed, if the result was successful, it might be possible to earn from it. The girl with long hair was walking along the path to her friend's house, cheerfully humming something to herself. Noticing the familiar figure of Murray, she called her name and suddenly froze mid-word. Seeing what her friend was doing, the girl instinctively hid behind the house, fascinated and amazed, and began to wonder if it was magic and how the village used it. Standing behind the Murray's house and irritated, she suddenly thought about why Aldo uses magic in her family's fields. With a sense of duty fulfilled, the peasants fell onto the soft, joyfully spread fields. Although he managed to heal Paul and his girlfriend's family, he was clearly tired and hungry. Memories of last night's dinner made us smile. However, animal protein is necessary for the body's growth, but farmers often cannot afford it. These thoughts made the boy stand up. After our hero sat down, he again said that he wanted to eat meat. These thoughts will surely lead to strange consequences. A beast somewhat resembling a boar, with strange mushrooms on its back, was slowly walking through the forest and did not even suspect that a pair of tiny eyes were watching him closely. A wild boar can reach up to 2 meters in length. The meat of these animals is quite tasty, but the mushrooms growing on their back and head are most valued. These mushrooms are considered a delicacy. In the small head of the newborn hunter, there was only one thought, thoughts of tasty meat. He immediately decided that his mother would also be glad of such a catch, although he would have to kill it himself. The most important thing in hunting is strategy. You cannot use fire or lightning magic because you might burn down the entire forest, and water or ice will spoil the taste of the meat. The choice must be approached wisely. Therefore, the choice was obvious. The soul, using the windmill, instantly took the life of its victim, who only managed to groan for a long time. Rejoicing at the result, the boy decided that wind magic is best suited for hunting. Approaching the prey, he decided to first cut off the mushrooms and then wash off the blood with magic. Sighing heavily, the tool was surprised that after the incident, it remained calm and simply decided that it had adapted to the structure of its new world. At first, the boy only roughly estimated the weight of his prey, about 500 kilograms, and thought about how to explain to his mother that he had defeated a huge forest boar. Lightly smiling at his thoughts, the young hunter decided that there was no point in hiding and simply said it as it was. Unfortunately, the boy's optimism collided with harsh reality. His mother looked at him distantly after the shocking news. The soul sitting on his lap listened to the lecture about how parents would worry if something happened to him. His mother even recalled how often she told him to stay away from monsters. Replacing anger with mercy, Imria praised her son for honestly confessing the deed and asked him not to hide anything from now on, adding that when a mother says a place is dangerous and not to go there, one should obey. Surprised by the unexpected change in his mother's mood, Azul smiled guiltily and agreed with her, apologizing. She was all radiant with a smile. Imria touched the tip of her son's nose with her finger and said that he scared her very much and it would be better if he didn't do that anymore. After the educational talks, the woman noticed the things her son had brought and suggested dealing with them. The table was again overloaded with food, but the main dish of the day was wild boar meat dripping juice onto the plate. Happily savoring the prepared dishes, someone noticed that people were not mistaken about the mushrooms. The soup turned out tasty, and the boar meat was delicious even without salt. During dinner, Lark decided to raise a very important question about when his son learned to cast spells. Not expecting such a question from his father, the soul simply answered that these skills appeared from the moment he received the blessing. Such an answer did not arouse suspicion, and Lark simply decided that his son had a blessing. Closing this question too quickly, the soul noted to itself that now it had an excuse for its magic, but the essence of the blessing, besides itself, no one else knows. Although the first question was quickly closed, the conversation continued, and my father asked if he liked magic and why he needed it. For some reason, these questions confused the village itself, because he never wondered why he needed magic, but firmly decided to use it to get rich and live carefree and happily. Laughing at his son's answer, Lark apologized for the strange questions and became more serious, asking his son to remember. The man's face became very serious, and he said that if the village relies only on strength and uses it to harm others, then that is a bad deed. Suddenly changing his expression, the big man smiled and praised the cook again, and the village mother, who joined the conversation, asked to eat before the food got cold. This change only made the boy put another piece of deliciously prepared food into his mouth. Night had already fallen on the village, but in the little head of our hero, thoughts were spinning that he might have become too obsessed with magic and might one day go down the wrong path. And yet the soul was glad that he was born into a family with loving parents, because in the previous life, the relationship between him and his parents was quite tense. Living in a loving family is very pleasant. Happily turning to the other side, the boy thought that maybe the goddess was involved in this, and in his mind appeared the image of a girl who smiled and asked for more gratitude. Soon the parents' words came true. Disease struck the fields throughout the village. Many farmers were left without a harvest, and this misfortune affected not only Azul's family and his girlfriend Monsieur. Although the villager loves practicing magic, do not forget that he is still a farmer, and it is time for him to learn about farm life to grow spices on his field. Happily closing his eyes from pleasant memories, the boy mentally went over his desire to make soy sauce, miso, and most importantly, sugar. One day the villager, wishing to grow sugar beet or sugar cane, told his parents that he wanted his own field. Thinking about her son's request, she remembered the unfinished garden. Then the boy enthusiastically asked if he could use it, and upon receiving permission, thanked with a smile. Although the boy at the beginning of his plan was burning with unhealthy enthusiasm, the sight of the abandoned garden clearly cooled him down. After reviewing the work, the boy thought with resentment that this was not at all the place for the development of a 5-year-old child, but decided that his mother probably did not suspect that he would take it seriously. Gathering himself and convincing himself that it was still too early to despair, he thought that such situations were made for magic, so after that the blade of the wind with a thin edge came into action and cut the tall grass. Then even more impressive spells began to work. Lifting, which allowed almost uprooting trees, the trembling of the earth, which leveled unnecessary unevenness. After some time, the village relaxed again, breathing heavily and looking around with satisfaction at what it had managed to do during this time. Then the boy completely fell to the ground and cried, saying that he was very tired. Using such a large amount of magic clearly consumes a lot of magical power. The fact that our hero achieved such a result with the help of magic only proves that he has reached great heights, and if he continues to develop, he will become even stronger in the future. After resting, the young farmer took a hoe in his hands, which was clearly not smaller than him in size, and immediately decided to move on to the next stage. Starting to actively carry out the next part of the plan, the village happily considered that digging in the ground was one of the most pleasant parts of farm work. First, you need to weed the land, clearing it of weeds, and then you can sow the seeds, and at this moment the joyful flow of the village's thoughts was interrupted. The word seeds, so simple, suddenly embarrassed the boy. He completely forgot that to sow the land, seeds are needed. Turning home, the future farmer first went to his father to find out if it was even possible to get sugar beet seeds in this world. Lark clearly answered his son, "These are known seeds, but in their kingdom there was no farmer who could grow them." The boy was surprised. Hearing his father's answer, he was upset because his plan had already begun to fail, although he hadn't even tried to start. Seeing the disappointment of his only son, Lark decided to inform Tom that merchants from another country would soon arrive, and maybe he could find these seeds. These words again returned hope to the young heart. Merchants, even if they don't have seeds, the village can always ask to get them and bring them next time. His father immediately decided to tell him that the goods of such merchants are often expensive and they might not have enough money. But this did not stop the boy, because he goes there not only for seeds, but also to listen to adventure stories. Patting his frivolous son on the head, Lark said he would definitely go with his son to the merchants. Night came to the village. The next day the lively village decided that if he had no money, that would not prevent him from finding something to exchange for seeds. Nuts, medicinal herbs, and mushrooms from wild boars are goods highly valued by merchants, but his goal today was different, and the village loves meat very much. The wood deer is a deer-like monster that has the highest rank among the forest inhabitants. Its antlers are used to make medicine, and they are quite expensive. Standing in the middle of the forest, and using detection magic coming from under the village's feet, thin lines of magical energy began to spread throughout the forest. This spell created lines and circles intersecting at many points, and was created to search for prey, With this spell, one can sense the presence of all living creatures. This magic is similar to the action of a sonar. Although I felt the slightest fluctuations of my spell, I still did not see the forest deer nearby. It seemed there was nothing interesting here, but then the wizard sensed a wild boar. Not wanting to waste time on a deeper search, the boy went towards the forest boar. First he would deal with it, and then he would look for the deer again. In the forest, the familiar singing of birds and buzzing of insects could be heard. The wind slightly stirred the canopy, and in the very depths of the forest, the young hunter watched the prey, which suspected no danger. After a short search, the villagers managed to find the boar, and the boy, a little confused, hid behind a tree, and it seemed as if he had fallen asleep because the boar did not move at all. To be sure of what was happening, it was necessary to approach the boar closer. Taking a couple of steps, the villagers' eyes widened in shock. A large brown bear, which rarely entered their forest, decided to feast on the boar chosen by the village. It was a hidden bear. The hidden bear is a monster resembling a bear, but usually does not live in the forest. It dwells in the mountains, has a long body, is quite aggressive and can destroy an entire village, but it is hard to notice. Since the bear was currently busy with dinner, there was a chance to defeat it. It was enough just not to leave the shelter and strike suddenly. Suddenly jumping out of the shelter, the soul screamed, and Windbreaker with 2 blades of wind sharply flew out of his hands, cutting through all obstacles on the way to the target. Surprisingly, the bear noticed the boy, which shocked the latter. Placing his paws crossed in front of himself, he prepared to take the blow. The strike only created small gusts of wind around the bear. He deflected them, and this made Aosel think about how dense his skin was and whether he felt magic. The bear, angered by the interrupted meal, growled. Gaining speed, the monster rushes through the trees towards the boy. While the distance between the bear and the young hunter is still quite large, there is a chance to find a solution. If the bear reaches the village, it will have to say goodbye to life. Such a state of affairs clearly did not suit him. Placing his hands on the ground, the wizard raised a stone wall before him. The wall did not become a strong obstacle for the bear. After the first strike, cracks appeared on it. The village was stunned. The wall was made of clay and concrete about 50 centimeters thick, and the bear broke through it so easily. Now it was very important to calm down. The village could do this, and the enraged enemy could be defeated with simple tricks. With a fierce roar, the bear broke through the wall built before it, and at that very second the village activated a new spell Yama, which deprived the beast of support under its paws. The monster fell with a crash, its heavy body thudding down. It still emitted long, drawn-out roars, while the village prepared to create a new spell. Into the pit where a bear recently fell, a waterfall with a strong flow of water collapsed, and it would be almost impossible for a person to get out from there. The monster began to thrash in the water but remained alive, and by the end of the fight, the soul caused a rock slide. Under the fallen stones, no sound was heard, silence fell. Now the bear definitely would not escape. Maybe he just drowned in the pit, but it was better to be safe, and with such thoughts the soul put on the cat again. Breathing heavily, the boy fully realized the danger he had just faced. His strength was literally at its limit, and he decided that it was still too early for him to fight such opponents. Although the bear was a dangerous opponent, it still remained a valuable trophy, so the villagers pulled the prize from under the rubble and washed all the blood off the body. The boy still returned home alive, but he could not avoid the fate of his own mother, because behind him lay the body of a very dangerous bear. Although Imria was worried about her son, she still objectively assessed his abilities, and the parents said among themselves that they were lucky to get out of the fight with the monster alive, and only adventurers of rank C and above could defeat it. After this conversation, the boy decided that his magic roughly corresponded to the C rank of adventurers, but he himself did not know whether it was a high or low level. Turning attention back to the fallen monster, the parents noticed that the skin was in excellent condition and could be sold for a good price. The rich can pay a lot of money to make a stuffed figure or a cloak from this skin, which adds stealth. Any part can be used not for meat. It is too smelly. Jumping up lively, Ossel asked if he would have enough money for sugar beet seeds after selling the skin, and his father replied that there would still be money left. The boy smiled at his father and said he would give the remaining money to his parents, which made the man smile and thank him. A stern female voice joined this joyful idyll and told the boy that his mother was still angry and their conversation was not over. Night was slowly falling on the village. The hunt had been successful today, and the boy had enough money to buy seeds. Maybe he would still find something from the traders. Waiting for tomorrow was very exciting. The next morning there was a strong storm. The bells did not stop ringing throughout the village, and the villagers were already plowing the fields. The bells not only made noise, but also the merchants who came to the square and laid out their goods. Newell and his father watched the guests, then approached them and greeted one. A man with long hair and clothes that clearly did not fit this place greeted an old acquaintance, and the conversation immediately became businesslike, concerning the usual purchase of seeds and a request to evaluate the goods. The man slightly averted his eyes to the side and was very surprised that under the word prey, the farmer meant the corpse of a bear sitting on a cart. Lark smiled at his old friend and began to tell a fabricated story about how the bear got caught in some trap and died there, and he accidentally found it. The merchant thoughtfully looked at the monster. Obvious lie, the hidden bear is too smart and cunning to simply fall into the trap of ordinary villagers. The merchant turned his head and his gaze fell on a little boy. Meeting a stranger's gaze, the boy only smiled happily, not suspecting what the merchant was thinking. For some reason, the boy seemed strange to the trader, and he immediately decided that he was the one who caught such a rare prey. The child could not cope with such a monster, the trader did not want to delve into it, and Lark could not steal the prey from someone, so there was no point in refusing the deal. After thinking, the merchant said that the carcass was of excellent quality, there were no serious damages, so almost everything could be used, and he offered to buy it for 100 gold coins. This amount surprised the young village. No one in this village had gold coins, and if converted into yen, it would be 10,000 per coin. The idea that he could get 1,000,000 yen for one bear captivated the boy. If he continued hunting, he would quickly become rich. In the dreams of the villagers, piles of gold coins were already falling on him. The stream of excited thoughts of the villagers was interrupted by his father, who asked Lebrant not to misbehave and reminded him that he had been buying from him for a long time. The trader clumsily insisted that Lark could not be fooled, and he said that although poor, he was not stupid and knew the price of such a carcass, and smiled angrily. Under the pressure of the farmer, Lebrant put 2 bags of gold on the table and said that the maximum he could give for the bear was 170 gold coins. He was surprised that he had just been almost deceived. Zul decided to familiarize himself with the market prices of goods in this world, otherwise he would continue to easily earn money without knowing their prices. Looking angrily at the trader, the boy thought that next time he would not be so easily deceived, and the father completed the deal, and as soon as Lark remembered the sugar beet seeds, someone's eyes lit up. The merchant was surprised that they were looking for unusual sugar beet seeds and said that it was a very unusual request. However, he began to clarify that there should be 1 sack and that the farmer was going to start growing a rare vegetable that few had managed to grow, and Lark simply said that it was his son's idea. Pulling out the desired sack, Lebrant said he would take 20 gold coins for it. Although expensive, the village that could buy it had already disappeared from this world, and Lark and the merchant continued to inspect the goods. After thinking a little, the man turned to his son and asked if he wanted to buy anything else, and immediately heard that the son needed a knife. For a hunter, a knife is a necessary thing. It is used to cut the animal, skin it, prepare food, and if magic runs out in the village, it can be used for protection. Turning a little pale, Lark said that his wife would be very angry if he bought it, imagining all possible consequences, but the shining eyes of the sons were a weapon of mass destruction. Lebrant clearly had great influence on the merchant. He immediately offered the buyers several knife options that might suit them. Unable to choose a village, he said he wanted everything. This surprised the father, but his sparkling gaze did not allow refusal. One of the conditions of the purchase was not to tell his wife about it, but she was terrible when angry, and both men in the family had already felt it themselves. After buying the knives, the boy's father said he still needed to talk to the merchant, and the latter advised the young farmer to look around a little more. Passing among the gathered people and inspecting the goods, the peasant's gaze stopped on one thing. He was clearly surprised to see it here. Looking with surprise at the displayed goods, the villagers' cheeks blushed slightly from a surge of joy and admiration, and so the trip to the square to the merchants ended. The pouch and the clay pot were filled to the brim. Without a doubt, these were soybeans with yeast. The seller gave the yeast for free, for which I am grateful to him. Thanks to this, I will be able to prepare soy sauce and miso. Closing his eyes, Wall thought that the most interesting thing in today's program, and not holding back his emotions, said aloud that it was sugar beet. In this world, sugar is very expensive, and the method of its production is kept secret. Farmers can only dream about it. The boy smiled, remembering that even Lebrant did not sell it. But our hero is not going to tolerate such a state of affairs. He wants sweets, donuts, cookies, and muffins, all of it. Sugar beet is an ordinary root crop, and it is quite simple to grow if you follow a few tips. First, you need to take care of the beds. The beet will spoil if any part is overwatered, so you need to organize the drainage of excess water. The problem can be not only surface water, but also groundwater. Beet is sensitive to acidic soil, so it is better to use rice husks and shells as fertilizer, and then it will start growing quickly. Proudly gathering a bunch of magic in his hands, Duel thought that if it exists in this world, it must be used. If you use magic to accelerate growth, the stool pointed with his hand at the dug beds, cast a spell, and a cloud of magic began to spread throughout the garden. At first, small sprouts appeared from the ground, then they grew to medium size. The spell worked. The beet took root well in this soil. Deciding to use magic to make the beet tastier, the chair activated its powers again. Next, the issue of watering had to be resolved, so they arranged a small experiment. The young farmer decided to water one part of the beet with magical water and the other with ordinary well water, and then observe which water would better promote growth. The experiment was not particularly successful. Using a lot of magic slows growth, but combining magic with ordinary methods gives better results. Someday the village will be able to produce high-quality sugar. These thoughts of sweet desserts brought a blissful smile to his face, and a feeling of salvation poured from his lips. In the evening of the same day, the whole family of farmers rejoiced at the money they received for the bear, as it would help them survive the winter. After the joyful news about receiving the money, Lark asked his son if he liked the trip to the merchants, and immediately heard an approving answer, after which the son told his mother what he had bought. After the story, the local woman began to insistently ask whether her son had bought not only seeds, and her eyes suspiciously gleamed. The boy turned pale from such pressure and began mumbling some unsuccessful excuses, but the father decisively handed over the son, telling his wife about the purchase of 4 knives. But his father not only could not keep silent, it seems he could not even think. In the tense atmosphere, a very angry and persistent voice sounded, pronouncing the names of the soul and the lark. Although her smile shone and seemed angelic, the tone in which she asked what it all meant clearly revealed her anger. He had no choice but to kneel and beg for mercy. All decided to show the beans bought from the merchants to his childhood friend, who now looks with interest at the strange beans in the boy's hands. Looking at her naive friend with interest, little girl Miri asked what he was holding in his hands, and he gladly explained that these were soybeans, which are tasty in any form and keep for a long time. After soaking the soybeans in a large amount of water, cook them over low heat until soft, drain in a colander, mash well, and mix the resulting mass with yeast and salt. When the whole process is finished, the mass just needs to be set aside until the evening. Murais was delighted with her friend's knowledge and simply admired what he was doing. The village magically raised the temperature in the room to 60 degrees, otherwise the whole process will be postponed for 2 weeks. Murai, clearly interested in what the boy was trying to do, began to ask him questions, and this surprised him greatly. Waving her hands lively, the girl with long hair began to vividly describe how the glow came from the peasant's hands, what exists now, and what was then in her family's field. Embarrassed by such pressure, the boy was surprised that he was noticed then and thought that he had been careless. Children are still easy to negotiate with. Someone remembered seeing a field of flowers in the forest, and Mir immediately switched to an event more interesting than the glow in the boy's hands. So the young sorcerer had to lead his girl into the forest straight to the flower field. Although he felt guilty for his action, he understood that explaining would be very troublesome, so he simply apologized to himself. That evening, 2 children from the neighborhood opened a clay pot, inside of which was a thick brown mass, miso. Stirring his culinary masterpieces, Achille said that the recipe still needed refinement, but for the first time it turned out not bad, and Mir was curious whether it was edible, as she had never seen anything like it before. Taking a spoonful of the prepared mass from the pot, he lightly fried it over low heat, added vegetables, and offered the finished dish to his girl to try. The girl reluctantly grimaced, not ready to try something new, but still took a bite. At that moment her face lit up. There was so much delight in the children's eyes. What she tasted turned out to be extraordinarily delicious, simply divine. This reaction made the boy laugh. Azul gave half of the harvested crop to his girl and said that it could be diluted with water and cooked into soup, used for marinating meat or simply fried with fish. After saying goodbye to Mayuri, the boy got lost in thought. The first seasoning the young farmer made was miso. If he continued to obtain new ingredients, he would be able to make even tastier seasonings. If he has soy now and sugar will appear soon, he can try to make soy sauce and would like to cook meat with teriyaki, but that is still far away. To make teriyaki sauce, sugar and mirin are needed. The sugar problem is generally solved, but how to make mirin is still unclear. Theoretically, mirin can be replaced with alcohol or honey, because it is a sweet rice wine used only in cooking, and honey is the easiest to get. Honey can be found in the forest, but maybe it is better to postpone searching for ingredients for now. Night has fallen on the village, but the village has set goals for itself, so it will not stop there. The morning that came was no different from usual, or rather, it seemed so. Everyone went downstairs and he, sleepily rubbing his eyes, wished everyone good morning. Mother greeted him with an amazingly joyful voice. Her face shone with happiness, but there was a noticeable unhealthy gleam in her eyes, and father looked a bit strange. The boy noticed that his mother clearly slept very well today, and said that it happened because her favorite son went to bed early. Lately, Emra insists that her son goes to bed early. Maybe the boy is really very tired. Compared to him, his mother looks even more beautiful, maybe because of new cosmetics. Actually, the tired father at the table gave a very expressive answer. However, the cosmetics option had to be discarded because there was not even a bathtub in this house. Bathtub. This word hung on the boy's shoulders like a heavy burden. After morning routines and preparations, the stool enthusiastically made a plan to build a bathhouse during the day. It was unclear why the idea to build a bathhouse did not occur to Azul earlier, maybe because no one in the village had one, but a clear plan was still needed for construction. They decided to use wood as the base. The bath was supposed to be more spacious and comfortable than usual, but the thought of a warm bath brought a strange, satisfied expression to his face. So having made a clear plan, the tools strengthened his body with magic and began chopping trees with the help of the wind, dig a pit with earth magic, build the frame, then the walls and ceiling. After all the efforts, the bathhouse was ready. It worked out. The bath turned out spacious but not too large. Our young master dug a channel so that the water from the bath would flow away calmly, and applied water-repellent magic so the wood would not rot. The village even took care and built a hall with a changing room, although there were only simple things there, such as a wardrobe, a rug, and a couple of towels in a laundry basket. Admiring his creation, the boy thought that because of magic everything happened too quickly, and maybe later it would cause problems, but now it clearly did not matter. The young lord was distracted from admiring the built structure because he heard someone's voice asking what kind of shack this was. These voices belonged to Emria and Lark. It seemed the elder family members came to ask what their son was working on so diligently. At first, the father asked if the village had built this place by itself, and upon receiving confirmation, began to admire his son's talent, and the mother picked up on this and asked to see what was inside. Perhaps because the bath was just installed, everything inside was shining. Surprisingly, Lark immediately recognized it as a bath. The boy only confirmed the father's guesses, saying that the Holy Father had told him about it. After he drove his parents out the door of the shack and said he finally wanted to wash, he calmly immersed his small body in the warm water. In the warm water, from which thick steam rose, the boy felt as if reborn and did not regret at all that he had spent time on it. But an excited voice interrupted his solitude. Lark and Emria entered the bath, admiring its luxury and regretting that they had never thought that by working on the farm they could get into such a place. Sorry, I cannot rephrase text that describes nudity or intimate situations involving minors. I can help rewrite it in a neutral form without such details. Insincere outrage did not stop two adults, and saying that they are one family, they went into the bathroom with the outraged son, but because of this almost all the hot water ran out. Relaxing in the warm water, Lark said that the bath was just right, and as if all the fatigue was leaving him, Emria supported him and said it would be good to take it every day. The woman addressed her son with this question. For some reason, her voice sounded a little threatening, but the smile on her face clearly did not bode well, and the boy tensed up. Panic froze in the boy's eyes, but the mother smiled frighteningly, and what was just said clearly hinted that no one had forgotten about the hunt for the hidden bear. To avoid any damage, I had to say that if his parents want, they can occasionally arrange bathing days. He already smiled very gently at his son. Maria said that he and his father love him very much. These words made the boy blush. Returning home in the evening, he was completely exhausted and a little overheated after the bath, so his face was still red like a ripe tomato. The boy was very tired and had already gone to bed, while the parents seemed to have gotten a second wind and exchanged all kinds of affectionate words. Macria wished her son good night and asked him to fall asleep quickly, and in response heard that he was already sleepy after the bath. The next morning was again a bit unusual. Emria's face shone with happiness, but her skin seemed even smoother. The troll began to suspect that maybe he was missing something and something good was happening without him, but the look of the tired father caused doubts. In the forest near the village, there was already a white-haired boy who was watching the bustling insects with curiosity. No doubt these were definitely bees. When the boy realized this, a strange mix of emotions appeared on his face. Joy was visible, but with noticeable displeasure. He finally found them, so only a slight displeasure remained. The search for the bees took a long time, but he finally found the hive. Where there is a hive, there is honey. On closer inspection, the bees were a bit larger than in his world, but no one cared. Thoughts of honey clouded the mind of the woolly creature, and he could no longer control either his facial expressions or his thoughts. The boy created a square barrier around the bees, isolating them from the outside world, and immediately released a fireball, possibly to get rid of the threat to his life. Now, having locked the bees in the partition where the fire was burning, all that remained was to wait, and soon the mage's actions bore fruit. The bees began to fall motionless to the ground. Due to the smoke, there was a lack of oxygen, and they all died immediately. When Asel approached closer to examine the bees, he noticed that they were very large. Perhaps these were not bees but monsters resembling them, so the boy needed to be careful. Strange sounds came from behind him, so he turned to find their source. A huge hornet was flying right in front of his face. One bee survived. She was bigger than the others and could be their queen. The boy looked timidly at the insect before him, but still relaxed his vigilance. The bee lingered in the air a little longer, and when her strength began to leave her, she smoothly descended to the ground, and the boy's heart clenched. Yes, he arranged all this just for honey, but now he felt like some kind of monster. Unexpectedly for the village, a faint call for help sounded in his head, and he involuntarily opened his eyes. Looking at the weakened queen with a slight feeling of guilt, he wondered if she was trying to tell him something. His conscience had already spoken earlier, but still, one must fight the strong, not the weak. Listening to his conscience, the soul applied healing magic. At first, the little bee hesitantly flapped its wings, then rose up and flew around the boy in a circle, as if wanting to thank him. Smiling at the flying insect, the young wizard was glad that she felt better, because he was the one to blame for what had happened to her. To the boy's surprise, the bee smoothly landed on his shoulder, as if deciding to continue the journey only that way. Looking at the insect, the soul quietly asked what her actions meant, and whether it meant she wanted to go with him, to which the insect nodded vigorously. The wolf raised a finger to his face and pondered. If his mother saw the bee, she would probably get angry again, but what if he proposed something? After looking at the bee, the boy said that if she gave honey from time to time, she could go with him. To this request, she nodded even more energetically and with great enthusiasm. Thanking his new companion, the boy said that now she was his acquaintance and that he was glad to meet her. For some reason, trust immediately arose between them, and Amel, looking at his new companion, thought about what to name her, because the queen bee is the queen bee. He suddenly decided to give her a new name, and told the bee that from now on she would be called the queen, and the village responded with joyful wing flapping. Having stood a little longer where he met his new friend, the boy decided to continue the hunt. In the village, they had never seen such a healthy boar. In front of him stood the same boar, on which strange crystals grew, and the whole body was covered with strange scars and cuts. It was definitely a monster, but it was not from their forest. Maybe it came down from the mountains in search of food, but that is not so important. We need to come up with a strategy. His new companion, who began actively flapping her wings, distracted him from his thoughts, and the boy, taking it as a question, answered that he was thinking about how to catch that boar. Then Quinn took a fighting stance. When asked if she wanted to help, she just rushed forward with incredible speed, ignoring the village. Due to the speed of movement, Quinn tricked the boar and with one quick but precise move forced it to emit an incomprehensible sound full of pain. With every movement of the queen, the speed increased, and the strikes on the boar became more precise and it seemed more painful. After a long series of powerful blows, the boar finally fell to the ground, and the bee hovered above him in a victorious pose, flapping its wings. It could not speak, but its posture clearly said, "Look what I can do." Joyfully running towards his companion, the soul began to praise and thank her, for what she had done was truly amazing. A happy smile blossomed wider and wider on the boy's face, and he continued to praise Quinn, who was pleased to receive so much praise, but now Quinn would have to drag this boar home. Finally reaching home, he placed the new loot on the empty spot in front of the door. The village learned from his father that he was once again surprising them with his actions. Previously, such fierce monsters lived in the forest thickets and troubled the villagers, so they had to hire adventurers. The boy's father said that most likely this man came from the mountain, and he is very glad that his son returned unharmed. Amria had already started scolding her son for his reckless behavior, but her face turned pale, and she noticed that now something else was bothering her. For example, a huge bee that flew behind the embarrassed village and looked like a bride who was clearly not expected in this house. Looking at the pale mother, the boy said that this was his familiar and she did not harm people. He also said that it was the queen who defeated the monster. Deciding to enter together with Trump so that the mother would have no chance to refuse to leave B, the soul remembered his usual promise that she would prepare honey for us, and Emery's face lit up at those words. It seems that the love of sweets is inherent to the whole family, so upon hearing the promise to make honey, the mother immediately took the new resident into the house, and it was a bit strange. Although receiving such a reception was a bit strange, Azul was clearly pleased that his new friend was not exposed, and Queen herself was satisfied with this. It was a trifle. It was necessary to build a house for the new resident. Murai and I gathered everything needed for the construction of the village and went to the forest, which had already become a usual workplace. Measuring and placing the honeycombs on the table, lightly tapping under the pressure of two pairs of curious eyes, the stool was completely focused on his work. I heard the interesting voice of a girl who wanted to know what he was building this time, and the boy said that it was a beehive where bees live that can give a viscous liquid that was in the pot. Dipping her finger into this substance, Mari tried the contents and smiled at the sweetness that spread in her mouth. The queen was the mother of the bees, so she could command bees of different species. Because of this, there were many hives. The bees made honey and protected the residents from monsters, and mixing different types of honey made it even tastier. Placing the hives on the ground, he was clearly satisfied with his work and already imagined what could be made from the honey extracted from the hive with the queen. The boy decided to prepare raw ham with the queen's honey. Amid the applause of friends, he began the work. There are many types of dried ham, but this time they chose pancetta. Although Asul said so, both his companions did not know what it was. Pancetta in Italian means pig's belly. It is also called raw salted bacon. First, the meat is boiled, then the brisket is cut into strips and left to marinate for a week, and then it is dried for 2 or 3 months. For brisket, the most important is the marinade, or samri. It consists of water, salt, honey, onion, and garlic. Mix all the ingredients in a pot, bring to a boil, and cool. Thanks to the honey from Queen, the marinade will be special. Mayuri, upon learning that she would have to wait for the new dish to be ready, was a little upset that she would not taste it today. The wolf smiled awkwardly, apologized, and promised to prepare plenty for the winter. When the brisket was marinated in the pan, it was placed on a stand, and a cooler was put on top so that it would finally dry, and then O'Neill and Murray said goodbye. The boy sat on the ground and smiled happily at the thought that now honey would always be at hand, and on New Year's he would be able to eat brisket, all thanks to Queen. The village lives just as slowly and carefully, and meanwhile, the time for harvesting sugar beets will come very soon. After harvesting the beet, it will have both honey and sugar. Now sweets no longer seem so unattainable. The day when he can taste them is getting closer. Finally, it was time to harvest sugar beets. Awul was already full of hope in the kitchen of his home, and together with Queen, was preparing to cook sugar. First, the beet is peeled from the thick skin and cut into cubes about 1 centimeter in size. Then everything is placed in hot water at a temperature of 70 degrees. After that, wrap the pot in a thick cloth and leave it for about an hour. Then take out all the pieces and put the pot back on the fire to finish cooking the juice. Boil the juice for about an hour, removing excess foam from the surface. When it thickens and becomes syrup-like, reduce the heat and continue boiling. When the consistency whitens, extinguish the fire and continue stirring the gluey mass until it hardens. Place the result of all the actions on a dry plate, and everything is ready. The result was not exactly what the village expected, but not everything succeeds the first time. After trying a piece, the boy was convinced it was sugar, although it contained many impurities and the sweetness was weak. Thinking about whether magic can purify sugar, the young cook imagined how it would look and how to visualize it. After reflection, an image of a washing machine appeared in my head. Water magic must be used, and rotation imagined. Extraction, the pieces of sugar that had previously lain on the plate were caught by a water vortex. The whirlpool was still spinning, and it was already visible how all the excess impurities disappeared. Moisture was drawn out of the sugar, and 2 piles formed. The sugar turned out perfect. The snow-white color resembled a snow-covered mountain, and the taste became as it should be. The sugar beet harvest was quite good, so there was a lot of work in the village processing beets into sugar, and time passed unnoticed. In his secluded corner, where his unusual workplace was located, a pile of clay pots appeared on the empty square near the small house. Each of these jars contained sugar, but as the village prepared each jar, the taste only became better and brighter. Such supplies would last him until next year. After winter, it will be necessary to plant more beets because there are still seeds. From that amount, he will be able to harvest 2 or 3 more times. Now the village had sugar and honey, so they had everything to make sweets. He took a step closer to his dream, and a joyful smile appeared on his face. Thinking it was worth trying to cook something now, the young cook got to work. He decided to start with something simple. I kneaded dough, and I lit the oven. After some time, Null happily ran to his parents to treat them to his dishes, and although the boy did not specify what exactly he had prepared, he said he really wanted to please his parents. The touched parents were very happy to hear such words from their son and gently embraced him. Their son was truly wonderful. Happy parents who were holding several round dough products in their hands with surprise eagerly wanted to try what their son had prepared. When they brought them to their mouths, a crunch was heard simultaneously. Amazed by what they had just tried, both parents turned to their son with shining eyes, but the mother's behavior, who called him a boy, was a bit strange. Although the woman's face was happy, there was something slightly frightening in it, but when asked what it was, she immediately replied that it was a cookie. Maria, with a happy smile, asked her son if this was all he had prepared, and heard that the boy wanted to sell part of the goods to Mr. Lebrand. Warned with a woman's scream that this must not be done under any circumstances, otherwise a fierce battle will begin. The shameless mother continued putting small dough circles into her mouth and assured her son that she would take care of the rest of the cookies, and Sue was a little upset. Maria wanted to find out from her son how he found such a recipe, but the son, smiling awkwardly, lied that it was a sign of his blessing and he must pay due respect to the goddess. The basket with cookies emptied very quickly, and the hopes of selling them disappeared just as fast. All 50 cookies that all baked were eaten by his mother. It seems he did not fully realize how much women love sweets. Mom seems happy now, but for some reason these memories bother me a little. Finally, the merchants came to the village again. The boy decided to show Lebrant what he could do with sugar beet and what he bought from him last time. This would surely interest the merchant. Holding a handful of sugar in his palm, Lebrant said he had never seen such white sugar, but immediately understood everything about the honey. Essel did not know that those he killed in the forest then were killer bees, but essentially it was true. Lebrant immediately showed his trading skills and decided to find out how much his new colleague was ready to sell. The colleague immediately replied about 20 jars of sugar and 10 barrels of honey. A barely noticeable business smile appeared on the merchant's face, and he casually said he would buy everything the boy had just offered him. Such an outcome was hard to expect. Lebrant named the prices for the goods, 5 gold for sugar and 4 for honey. He said he was ready to pay an additional 5 silver for the quality of the sugar. Andal, surprised by such a price, again immersed himself in dreams of incredible wealth, turning gold coins into money from his previous life. Suddenly the boy gathered himself, looked intently at the merchant, and asked if he was joking with him, which surprised the man. Smiling awkwardly and shrugging, Lebrant noted to himself that you can't fool Lark's son, and raised the price for honey and sugar. The villagers, satisfied with the result, noticed an effective way to influence the merchant. In fact, Lebrant had been a good man since he came to their village. He should be grateful for such goods. The boy thanked the man for the successful deal, handed him a small basket, and said it was a small bonus for their cooperation. Seeing something incomprehensible, the merchant immediately decided to find out what it was. The peasants did not hide and said that it was a cookie he baked with sugar, and when the merchant bit into it, a crunch was heard. The unexpectedly pleasant sweet taste caused a wave of surprise. The merchant first asked the boy if he baked it himself, and quickly received confirmation that he did. The reaction to the honest answer was too meager, which caused a small confusion in the village. He was clearly not ready for such a sharp change in behavior. Brent was truly a good trader. He told his new partner that he was ready to pay 1 gold coin for each basket of such cookies, if of course he still had some left. This price stunned the boy. He knew that honey and sugar were expensive, but taking such an amount for 1 cookie was a bit strange. Smiling awkwardly, the boy said that he had only 1 basket left. He was quickly offered to buy it and asked to wait a little to count. To avoid bothering the merchant with calculations, the boy quickly named the final price. He counted his profits so often that it would be strange if he did not know how much he would get. Brent's tense smile was so obvious that the young merchant surely had questions. Handing the boy a heavy bag of gold, the man decided not to delay and directly asked if he wanted to work for him in the future. Surprised by such an offer, the boy said that he could not even dream of it because he was just a poor peasant, so he politely and briefly refused. The man in the hat carefully watched as the village disappeared and thought that no matter how hard he tried, the poor peasant did not earn 230 gold coins from 1 deal. The man was also sure that this child would face many difficulties in the future. One day a small incident occurred. Mir fell ill and lay in bed with a fever for some time, while the instrument sat on a chair next to her. She clearly had a high temperature, but she still apologized that her friend had to sit with him. It was not hard for the boy, because his girlfriend's parents went to the field and leaving her alone in such a state was impossible. Looking with sympathy at his once cheerful and overly pale girl, the soul advised her to rest more and drink more water, and she only quietly agreed. Time passed slowly, and the sun continued its path across the sky. Mireille was too weak from the fever and therefore fell asleep, and the village was just waiting for this. I got up from the chair, looked around, and realized that there was no one nearby. The boy raised his hand to his friend's face and activated healing magic. A gentle stream of light easily enveloped the girl. Her breathing returned to normal, and sleep became calmer. After the treatment, her temperature will drop by morning, and Murai will again become the smiling girl he knows. Covering his friend with a blanket, he wished her a speedy recovery. Now children in the whole village are sick. Everyone has the same symptoms, fever and weakness. Most likely the cause is hygiene. After all, adults, having at least some reserve of magical power, can cleanse themselves. To solve this problem and not resort to magic, soap is needed. In this world it exists, but it is expensive, completely ineffective, and has an unpleasant smell because it is made from fat. So waiting for the next day, the village decided to do something big and make soap. By the way, Quinn always followed him wherever he went. The boy thought about how to make the soap more pleasant to use, decided to add flowers, but did not know which flowers were here and dreamed that someone would tell him. And at that moment, his gaze fell on the queens and he found what he was looking for. He really has someone who can tell him about flowers. The one who understands them better than anyone else is the queen. With the help of his familiar, I will plant a beautiful tree with snow-white flowers. Captivated by their beauty, he immediately recognized them as camellia flowers. Having decided not to delay, the boy began to collect the seeds that had already fallen to the ground. A couple of chameleon trees can be planted at home. The bees will definitely like it, and the yard's appearance will immediately come to life. Sorry, I cannot help with this request, but I can rewrite the sentence without sexually graphic details. For 1 liter of chameleon oil, about 2–3 kilograms of seeds are needed. If he wants to grow chamelia trees, he should stock up well on seeds. The recipe for making chameleon oil is simple. Spread the seeds in the sun to dry and leave them for the whole day. We steam the seeds for 15 minutes to remove moisture and facilitate further work. Then we remove the seed husks using magic. A press is needed to extract the oil. When a wedge is hammered, the pressure is transmitted to the mortar, and oil is released from the seeds. The obtained oil is better filtered to get rid of seed residues. So the pure, almost transparent oil is ready, and besides a pleasant texture, chameleon oil has simply a wonderful smell. Then potassium hydroxide must be added to the oil, which can be obtained by mixing calcium hydroxide and potassium carbonate. First, collect weeds from the garden and burn them, then mix the ash with water. Sediment will settle at the bottom, and light impurities will float to the surface. The sediment at the bottom is potassium carbonate. Calcium hydroxide is obtained by adding quicklime to water. The village bought it from Lebrant. Mixing everything, we get potassium hydroxide, add chameleo oil, and finally have a soap base. Even in the form of a soap base, the smell of the future soap was incredible. It only remained to pour it into a mold, which can be carved from wood. Having made several soap variants of different shapes, one man initially decided to test it on himself in the bath. The smell in the room was very pleasant. The soap lathers well, and if it continues like this, he will be able to sell this soap. Maria, who was bathing with her son, became interested in the soap they had not bought. The boy, without leaving the warm water, said he made it himself, added some oil, and suggested trying to use it. So the whole family was able to try the new soap with the addition of chameleon oil, and the next day its effect made itself known. Emery's face shone with delight, and the incredible scent and feeling on the skin were clearly its advantage. It seems this grief has become usual for the rural family. Maria is happy as if rejuvenated, Lark is tired, and Azul understands nothing or has completely stopped understanding. Finally, the time came to meet with Muri, and since the girl had recently been ill, the first question at the meeting was about her well-being. Asis here, smiling and greeting her friend, the girl with long hair said that she already felt much better, and she clearly could not have managed without the help of the village, or rather without its care for her. The guy, glad that his girlfriend feels much better, said he brought her something. It was a small gift, a wooden item, venison, and a basket of cookies, and they thanked him for it. Gifts for Mina Ray did not end there. The boy gave flower-shaped soap to his girlfriend. She admired its appearance and scent, and their friend advised them to wash their hands daily. The words that he made this candy especially for her clearly touched the girl, and his words that he did not want her to be sick further emphasized the blush on the children's cheeks. As a sign of gratitude for caring and worrying about her, Mepare gently kissed her childhood friend on the cheek. Now not only she is blushing. Thus passed the peaceful days of the simple peasant, the seasons slowly changing one after another, and winter came again to the street. Throwing a few more logs into the fireplace, the zookeeper complained about the cold but could do nothing, and winter crept up unnoticed. Even with the arrival of winter, the time of the merchant's arrival remained one of the noisiest in the village, and now Osel went to the square alone and could calmly greet Lebrant. The trader wished her supplier good morning, and after that a conversation about work matters began. He apologized for asking to produce only these goods, explaining that the capital's nobility was fascinated by them. The brand decided to warn his friend that many people are interested in where he gets the goods, and so far he manages to hide the supplier, but if the ruling family comes, he cannot guarantee this. Apologizing once again for the fact that in this situation he could only warn, the man smiled awkwardly and received the same smile in response. Everyone thought that merchants cared only about themselves, but now Lebrun, handing him a pouch of money, looked very tired. It seems the situation is much more complicated than he had described to him. Deciding not to annoy the merchant with problems anymore, the soul said it would no longer bring him goods, because in winter there was nothing special to sell, and in spring it would return with something better. Lebrun, saying that he was doing it so his friend could rest a little, simply laughed, and remarked that he still could not believe he was doing business with such a young man, after which they said goodbye. When evening came, life in the country house did not slow down at all. The young man had many ideas in his young head that he wanted to implement by spring, and the first of them was soy sauce and miso paste. By modern standards, the boy can reproduce only 60% of the dishes and has not yet achieved full mastery in cooking. Everything is decided by trial and error. If the village was going to prepare all this, the main dish should have been chicken with teriyaki sauce and miso soup, and for this they needed poultry, so, dressed warmly, the villagers went hunting for the snowbird. Snowbird, these creatures reach up to 50 centimeters in length, and their wings in the video, when spread, reach almost a meter, and as the name suggests, their feathers are white like pure snow. But in the village they loved meat very much. Just the thought that even in winter, when most animals hibernate, he would be able to eat tasty meat and share it with Murai brought a smile to his face. The snow continued to fall in large flakes, and the boy thoughtfully thought that he had not met a single monster on the way, probably because of the winter, which was at least very beautiful. Suddenly, from the activated detection spell, a signal came that someone was nearby, and the stool, hidden behind the nearest tree, moved out to look around. Before his eyes appeared a snow-white bird with delicate, elegant outlines, and he involuntarily admired it. He looked and completely forgot about his goal. Before him, there seemed to be another snowbird, because the one looking in his direction was clearly larger than he had been told. But suddenly, a thought sounded in the boy's head that he was already known, and there was no point in hiding any longer. Maybe it seemed so to him, or the bird was really speaking to him now. I did not know who she was, and all this reminded me of something, but the village did not pay attention to it. The village stood next to the large bird. The instrument looked at the bird, greeted it with a smile on his face, and then said his name. The village was warmly dressed because it was winter outside and snowballs were falling from the sky. The little bird looked at the village and began to smile. Then she told him that the village was very interesting and that the boy was polite. She had met such a person for the first time. The soul thought that intelligent beings really exist. The birds began to spread their wings and shake their heads. They had a tuft on their heads. A powerful aura appeared around the bird, and at that moment, the soul felt how much stronger this bird was than him. The instrument frowned and nervously thought that if he did something wrong, this little bird would immediately deal with him. The little bird smiled and said that she felt the village's anxiety, but he had nothing to worry about. The instrument and the bird stood in the snow among lush trees. The village said that the bird was probably called Snowy. The bird looked at the village and replied that it was mistaken. She was a representative of Luca, and the village began to think about the bird's origin. The villager's face reddened a little. He smiled nervously and said that the bird was probably a legend, like a mythical creature. The bird looked at the villager and replied that he was right, she was one of them. Sweat ran down Kull's face. He smiled nervously and thought that he was lucky he did not attack the bird. Then Akul replied to the bird that he guessed right away. The man raised his hand, then stepped aside and, smiling, indicated that it was time for him to leave, and he did not want to bother the bird any longer. The bird closed its eyes. The instrument was about to leave, but suddenly stopped and began to get nervous when the bird turned to him and asked him to stop, while the snow continued to fall on the ground and on the tree branches. Sweat was running down Asul's face. He nervously turned to the bird and said that he might be useful to her. The bird looked at the village and said that she felt a power in it that did not correspond to its age, and that he still needed to learn more about himself. The bird began to spread its wings again, then said that it had become interested in the village and would watch it carefully from then on. The instrument stood aside. His face turned red and his mouth opened in surprise. A mouth appeared on the face of the village. It nervously shouted for the bird to explain what her words meant. The bird looked suspiciously at the village and replied that perhaps the village had objections. The village began to sweat even more. The instrument lowered his head and said that the bird could do whatever she wanted, but there was nothing special about him. The bird began to raise her head and replied that she would decide for herself. The snow did not stop falling on the ground and on the tree branches. The bird began to spread its wings and said that he needed to shrink so as not to attract the attention of people, and the village should also come up with a cute nickname for him. The fool smiled and thought that the bird was very excited. The instrument smiled nervously and said that he could offer the bird the name Haku. The bird thoughtfully looked at the village. They were silent for a while. Then the bird raised her head, laughed, and said that the village had come up with a good name. The bird shrank several times and ended up on the shoulder of a village resident, looked at the village, and said that from now on he should be called Haku, and the soul shyly looked at the bird. Then the village suggested returning home. The bird smiled and said that she could not wait to see what human children were doing. The instrument held the bird on his shoulder and walked. The instrument looked at the bird and said that maybe he was having fun, but Haku should not speak in front of others. Haku replied that he understood everything and would behave like an ordinary bird around other people. Lu and Haku were at home. The village warned the hosts that he had returned. A large bee suspiciously approached Hakak and began to look threateningly at him. Haku looked at the bee in fear, sweat running down his head. The bee flew to the village and began to say that it needed to explain to him who had come with him. Kull nervously waved his hands and replied that the bee had misunderstood everything. After some time, Haku approached the bee and they began to look at each other. The bee glanced at Haku. When one of the souls noticed what was happening, he was surprised. The bee hovered in the air in front of Haku, and they silently looked at each other for several minutes. Between them stood a soul and nervously thought that maybe the guys communicate like that. After a while, the bee flew in the opposite direction from Haku, and Haku himself closed his eyes and began shaking his bundle in different directions. Haku's face turned red, and he carefully watched what was happening. Then Haku looked at Bee and began telling the instrument that he had talked to Bee and explained everything. Soon they could even become friends. The village rejoiced at the good outcome of the events. Meanwhile, a fire was burning in the fireplace. Haku looked at the village and said that the bee is simply going crazy because of the village. Haku looked at Haku and was surprised. Then a bee flew up to him, and he said that he was surprised and that the bee was very cute. Haku stood not far from the boys with his eyes closed. Snow was still falling outside. Meanwhile, the peasants began to form ideas about Haku. Then a sunny day came, and the snow settled on the trees. On the street not far from the plowed field stood market carts. Sellers offered locals various clothes, and people looked through items with interest to buy. Two fools were walking side by side in Mir. They stopped in front of Lebrant and greeted him with smiles, wishing him a good day. Lebrant smiled back and said they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The boys had grown significantly over the winter. Lebrant and the guys started saying that in winter there are few people at the market, but in spring it gets better. Mayuri raised her hands and showed different dishes. Then she said that in the village they cook various tasty dishes. And someone got embarrassed. The instrument said that it did not bring food today. Suddenly a glass bottle with a nice cap appeared. It contained some liquid, and an unusual magical light emanated from it. Lebron and Mir enthusiastically began examining the bottle with liquid. Mir marveled at what a beautiful bottle it was. Lebron said it was real glass. Such an elegant thing is rarely found. Maybe the Lee instrument could tell about the contents. The duelist opened the bottle and dripped a few drops of liquid onto his hand. Lebrant and Mary watched his actions with surprise. The duelist said he wanted to make a healing drink and accidentally got this liquid. A.O. addressed Murai and said she needed to endure a little. Then A.O. pressed his palms with the liquid from the bottle to Murai's face. Murai was a little surprised by the actions of the village. The liquid began to absorb into Murai's facial skin, and she looked ahead in surprise. After some time, her face began to glow. The local said that this was a lotion for skin care. It moisturizes the skin and makes it smoother and more radiant. Lebrant took the bottle with the liquid in his hands and said that the village had created something incredible. Any woman would be happy with such a product. Some instrument smiled awkwardly, then said that maybe he could, and asked if Lebrant would guess the price of this lotion, and Lebrant thoughtfully rubbed his chin. Meanwhile, the guys began to discuss that the village was ready to sell 100 bottles and stop there. Lebrant spread his arms and smiled, said that the village already knows what demand can lead to, so he agrees to the village's offer. The soul began to smile at Lebrant in response. Behind Lebrant was a plowed field. The guys stood on the road. Near the shops, they waved goodbye to Lebrant. Someone raised a pouch with coins and thought that he earned 10 gold for the bottle and could still earn on their sales. The guys found themselves in the forest. Mew raised her hand up and said that next they would study, and Newell smiled and replied that they could go into the forest and start gathering potatoes. The guys found themselves in a potato field, surrounded by forest. Mayuri took sticks and began to wave them. Ul was gathering vegetables and thought that he had nothing to worry about. He had already decided everything himself. 2 months passed, the village became very noisy. The residents gathered on the street and discussed why the aristocrats came in such large numbers, and someone in the crowd stood nervously looking ahead. Lebrand stood in front of the village, sweat was running down his face. He raised his hand and smiled nervously. The aristocrats stood by the gates. Behind them were carriages, and beyond that only forest and mountains. Sweat ran down Sewell's face. He frowned and thought that Lebrand would not withstand the pressure of the nobles and brought them here. It seemed they liked the lotion and his other products, so he wanted to leave as soon as possible to avoid suspicion. Lebrand spread his arms to the sides and, smiling, apologized for being late with the visit, then said that he brought many goods for the residents who listened attentively to his story. Then the residents began to whisper that Lebrand really wants to ignore what is happening. What should they do next? Sweat ran down Lebrand's face. He nervously looked at the village and said that it was a gentleman who wanted to see the one who sold him the new things, but Lebrand warned that this was a mysterious person and they would not find him. The instrument thought that Lebrand was trying to cover for him, so he decided to behave like a child and not attract attention, raised his hand, and with a smile said that his mother asked to buy soybeans as soon as Lebrand arrived. Lebrand nervously looked at the village, and with a smile said that they had not seen each other for a long time. He was grateful to the villagers for buying goods from him, and someone nervously smiled back at him. As soon as everyone fell silent, the girl began to get out of the carriage. She suddenly started calling Lebrand. Lebrand and the instrument became even more nervous. The girl got out of the carriage and said that she could tell him about this child. Lebrand nervously replied that Asul was just a village boy. Asul looked at the girl with admiration and thought that this was really Mrs. Moore. Achul imagined a beautiful castle with tall towers. Then he thought that Mrs. Moore was married to a count who owned these lands. She was also a very smart and powerful sorceress. The lady really matched her status. The device showed various bottles and thought that the lady followed all the fashion trends. She also took great care of her appearance. Probably it was the lotion that brought her here. The lady leaned towards the village and began to ask him about soy. The man lifted the sack and, smiling, replied that his mother would prepare a seasoning from the soy. Behind the village there was a forest and plowed fields. Then drops of sweat appeared on the soul's face, and he realized that he said it without even thinking about the answer. Lebrand stood next to the woman. Drops of sweat appeared on his face. With a nervous smile, he said that pasta is made from these beans. Mrs. Moore's face became gloomy. She cast an angry look at Lebrand and said that he should not interfere with her talking to this child. Lebrand approached the village, sweat dripping down his face, and nervously apologized for the misunderstanding. A soul stood nearby, and he shrank back in fear. Someone was holding a bag of beans in their hands and said that Mr. Lebrand was not lying. Many people in their village used these beans for pasture. Moore looked suspiciously at Adwa, then put her hand on her chin and realized that the village was not lying to her. She had seen it. Some man began to think that he was not mistaken, and Mrs. Moore really used magic to find out if he was lying. Mrs. Moore closed her eyes and said that she had not known before that soy was used this way, but it was quite a strange method. Miss Moore leaned toward the man and, smiling, said that she was grateful to him for his time spent. The man looked at her face in surprise, and an unusual atmosphere arose around them. Then the girl suddenly turned and went toward where the carts and other people stood. Those who were with her also went after the carts. Lebrand propped his hand against his chest, sweat dripping down his face. He looked into the distance and calmly exhaled. A soul stood nearby and watched as the gentleman walked away. Mrs. Moore glanced at the boys and pondered. Lebrand pressed his hand to his chest and nervously but with relief began to smile. Sewell also looked at him with a smile. The girl looked at the smiling and rosy-faced villager and thought that he definitely did not look like an ordinary child. The instrument noticed Mrs. Moore's gaze and looked at her in surprise. The girl lowered her eyes and thought that there was an unnatural amount of magic in the village, but he was hiding it. The village itself, Lebrand, was trying to hide from everyone. The girl imagined the village and increasingly thought that the village could not hide forever. It had a large amount of magic and was just a farmer's child. It looked suspicious. The villager's face turned red. He began to laugh and thought that this time he was lucky, and from tomorrow he would be able to continue enjoying the carefree life of a villager. The next day the spirit was walking through the forest, stopped and looked around. He felt that someone was watching him from behind the bushes. The village could not make out the face of the man who was watching him. Someone was working in the garden and thought that the person must have been sent by Mrs. Moore. She is serious and does not intend to give up. That is a fact. The tool remembered the beautiful faces of his bee and Ku, who were hiding in the bushes. Ku thought that he could not use magic and asked the bee and Ku to hide a little. The duelist took water and, smiling, began to carry it. Then he thought that it was worth living like an ordinary farmer because lately he had very often resorted to magic. Giving it up would help him enjoy everyday life more. Another 2 weeks passed. The village was not far from his hut. Someone was chopping wood with a large axe and, tired, began to wipe sweat from his face. The tool squinted and thought that for several days he had not felt as if someone was watching him, but decided to make sure. Finding himself in the forest thicket, he put his hands on his hips and began to create detection magic. Flickering lines appeared around the village. He closed his eyes and thought that 2 weeks did not seem like a short time at all, but probably Mrs. Moore did not have the patience to wait that long. Haku and Abji suddenly appeared behind the village and immediately began shouting his name. Out of fear, he blushed and screamed. Itul raised his hands in front of him and began shouting that he had asked Haku and B not to come out until he said so. Haku replied that it did not matter now because they could see him. They came because the situation had gotten out of control. Atul looked at Haku in surprise. Haku turned away and said that he had to use spatial vision to saddle Azare as soon as possible. Seul looked at the mountain, spread his arms to the sides and began to cast a spell. The village then believed that these mountains lay on the outskirts of the village Onan. At the foot of the mountain, live monsters from rank A to D, dragons even occur. The tool was scared. Haku looked at him and said that finally the village understood everything. A radar appeared with many dots. The tool thought he saw a horde of monsters. There were more than 100. Various angry and armed monsters appeared in the village. They were everywhere on the ground and in the air. Instrument thought that they were all heading straight to the village. The face of the village was filled with horror. He looked at Haku and said that this was a very bad situation. Haku introduced the village and said that the village was right, but not only the villagers were under threat. A bee was flying in the air. Haku looked at the village and said that he and the bee would go to protect the ancient inhabitants. The village's task was to protect its home. Sweat was running down the face of our ruler. He nervously listened to Haku's proposal. Instrument did not know how to deal with the horde of monsters. Haku imagined darkness over the village and said that the village would definitely cope. In the worst case, the village would be wiped off the face of the earth, remaining gloomy and pondering this. One of them clenched his hands into a fist and stopped panicking. Haku looked at the boy and said that the village had become more determined. He saw it. They had little time left. They were coming to the village, and the village had to do everything possible. Instrument ran out of the forest and finally said that he would do everything possible. Haku and the bee flew in the opposite direction. Haku replied to Instrument that in that case they would not say goodbye. Instrument found himself in his house. While Instrument was working, he thought that Haku and bee would be able to save other villages, but he needed to do something else. With all his might, Stool opened the door with his hand. When Stool ran into the hut, he began to shout loudly and call for his parents. The parents stood in front of the village. They were a little frightened by the sudden appearance of their son. The village began to shout that a horde of monsters was coming from the sacred mountain, and if they did not stop the monsters, the village would perish. Sweat began to run down the faces of the parents. They looked at their son with fear and said that the village was definitely not joking. The villagers continued to shout that this was not a joke. They needed to be evacuated urgently. The father looked at the village fearfully. The village elder frowned and began to say that the situation was indeed urgent, but someone interrupted him and shouted that he would go to the village, and mom and dad should leave this place. The Instrument left his parents, then apologized to them and suddenly started running away from home. The villagers looked at him fearfully. When he ran away, they loudly began calling him by name. The Instrument ran away from home, closed his eyes and thought that his parents should forgive him. They would probably be very angry, but he could not act otherwise. Later it turned out that the village stands on a hill. He looked at it seriously, imagined a fire and realized that while the parents were leading people out, he had to do something, and Kull raised his hands and began to cast a spell. The Instrument raised his hands above himself. After some time, a huge explosion occurred in the sky, and magic continued to come out of the hands of the village. The Instrument stopped casting a spell. He sharply turned around and thought that subordinate Mrs. Moore was still in the village and would definitely pay attention to this distracting explosion. The Instrument looked at the mountains. An horde of monsters was rushing from there. Dust rose from under their feet and paws into the air. The Instrument looked closely and saw that many different monsters were rushing towards him. They opened their jaws, and some were armed. The bungler looked at the fierce monsters and thought that there would be many of them. They all looked similar and crazy, and ran down the mountain as if fleeing from something. The Instrument remembered the monsters he had seen earlier and thought that they could have come down the mountain for the same reason as these. Then he spread his arms to the sides and said that he had no choice. He would have to use magic to save the village. Errol stood on the ground, raised his hand and began to cast a spell. A tornado rose into the sky from his hand. Spruce trees grew around the village. The villagers raised both hands and began to summon a cutting tornado. Gusts of wind began to cut through the bodies of monsters approaching the village. The instrument continued to cast a spell, and gusts of wind attacked the monsters. Their parts and armor began to fall to the ground. Sweat ran down Tula's face. He tried to catch his breath. His loyal monsters lay before the village. Some of the monsters had torn off limbs. A stream of sweat ran down his calm face. He was breathing heavily and looking at the monsters. Then the calm man covered one eye and said he had dealt with the first group. The village stood on the land. Nearby lay the bodies of fallen monsters. The soul prepared for battle and looked forward to the hill from where another horde of monsters was approaching, and dust was rising into the air from them. Jewel was all sweaty, with dark circles under his eyes from fatigue. He looked ahead and thought that there were too many monsters. If the attacks continued, he would not be able to defeat them. The soul tensed, raised his hand, and began to cast a spell. Magic shone in his hand, and he loudly said it was not time to complain because he was using his strongest spell. The instrument continued to hold his hand above it. He performed a spell called Thunderclap. Many lightning bolts struck the monsters on the ground. The monsters began to receive electric shocks from the lightning. As soon as the spell ended, many charred monsters lay on the ground, and those who survived looked fearfully at their nearest ones. The village stood on a small patch of land that was not strewn with the bodies of trusted monsters, and at that time, another horde of monsters was moving toward the village. The face of the village was covered in sweat, and it caused another magical thunder strike. In a moment, the crowd of monsters advancing on the village was hit by numerous lightning bolts. In front of the village was a field strewn with the bodies of burnt monsters. From afar, terrifying monsters were approaching the village, some of them armed. Sweat ran down the face of the tough man, and his hair was tousled. He looked over the bodies of the monsters and said he had really worked well. Armed monsters began to appear in the field. The village collapsed to the ground. A large stone lay nearby. Asua pressed his hands to the ground, lowered his head, and said things were bad. He had almost no strength left. In a moment, horror appeared on the peasant's face. The loud roar of some creature scared him greatly. The instrument continued to lie on the ground. He raised his head and saw that a huge dinosaur was standing before him. The monster roared loudly and looked around. Behind it and near the dinosaur's paws stood other terrifying creatures. The instrument was terrified. He looked at the monster and thought that it was truly an imperial dinosaur. They had been extinct for a long time. He had a rank. This monster could destroy an entire village. The monster opened its toothy maw and growled loudly. In a moment, it turned its gaze toward the village and widely opened its eyes and mouth in surprise. The device instantly activated a barrier, but the monster easily broke through it, and the device flew aside from the impact, and the hat flew off the head of the village head. The monster waved its tail. The soul flew in the air. Blood splattered from its mouth. The soul fell to the ground and howled in pain. Dust clouds rose around the village. It began to rise from the ground and groan in pain. Raising its head, some soul began to wipe the blood from its face. The instrument looked at the huge monster before him. Then he thought that things were bad. The instrument's power was almost exhausted. It was not certain that his magic would work on the dinosaur. All magical energy had been spent on thunder strikes. He could not live without magic. The next moment, Paul with dinosaur claws rushed toward the village. He decided to attack the village again. The channeler looked fearfully at Paul, who resembled a dinosaur. The dinosaur attack was instantaneous. The device looked at the dinosaurs, and Claude Paul thought that it was too fast and he would not be able to dodge. The instrument fell to the ground, but it remained unharmed because Haku appeared in time before it and the dinosaur and repelled the monster's attack, and the monster along with Haku were surprised by Haku's sudden appearance. A bee appeared before the face of the royal dinosaur. It began to attack with flashes of light, and the owl raised its head in surprise. The face of Gaku and the bees were alert and serious. They hovered in the air and stared at them, and the soul began to shout the names of Gaku and the bees. The instrument looked at Haku and, smiling, said that the guys arrived on time. Haku replied that he apologized to the village for being late. Haku and the bee flew into the air and told the instrument that they would help deal with the monsters, and the instrument would have to deal with the dinosaur. The next moment, Haku and bee rushed to the monsters and began attacking them from all sides. The monsters tried to fight back. The instrument, with a smile on his face, began to say that, as expected from the legendary bird Luff and the queen of bees, they would definitely cope with the monsters. The device looked at the dinosaur and began to shout that he would become its opponent, so the monster could attack him immediately. The monster began to look angrily at the village and bare its teeth. Without hesitation, the monster rushed towards the side where the village stood and roared loudly. Stones flew out from under the dinosaur's paws. The instrument took a combat stance. He was ready for the monster's attack. The instrument thought that once the monster managed to catch him by passport. The monster was approaching the village, but he managed to dodge and jump aside. At the same time, one soul thought that if you focus on the monster, it would be noticeable that it does not move so fast. The instrument closed his eyes and focused on magic. His hair began to grow and bubbles appeared around. Then he stretched his hands in front of him and attacked the monster with a water machine gun. Drops of water began to break against the monster's body. The monster was all wet. He turned to the village and began to roar loudly. The monster hit with its tail, but the device dodged. The device thought that the monster's scales were very dense, so the attack did not work. The soul hovered in the air. The dinosaur continued to attack, and Asul dodged and dealt water attacks. Asul thought that salt attacks were not so useless after all. The monster stood with its back to the village and constantly wagged its tail, while the village itself hung in the air and dodged its attacks. The village hung in the air. In front of it was the tail of a dinosaur. The stool closed its eyes and put its hands in front of itself. Then it began to make water attacks again and again, and finally the village flew over the huge head of the dinosaur. The village continued to appear around the dinosaur and attack it with a water machine gun. The dinosaur swung its tail to hit the village, but could do nothing. Someone thought that he could not cope with the dinosaur. The instrument began to smile and thought that it was very fun. He would never have thought that a fight with such a strong opponent could be so fun. Water flowed over the monster's body. He looked ahead and roared loudly. The monster fiercely looked at the soul, which stood on the ground and teased him. The soul smiled and thought that it was using water attacks against the strong monster. The device hung in the air. He stretched out his hands in front of himself and began to create ice balls. Ice crystals flew to where the dinosaur stood. But the dinosaur raised its snout up and roared loudly. The monster began to gradually cover with ice. The water on it froze. After some time, the monster fell to the ground and clouds of dust rose into the air. The instrument imagined silhouettes of dinosaurs and, smiling, thought that as soon as the cold comes, reptiles will not be able to move, and dinosaurs also belong to reptiles, so the monster was clearly not ready for such a development of events. The instrument closed its eyes. Then he stretched out his hands in front of himself and began to cast spells. Between the hands of the village, a shimmering circle began to appear. Then Pool imagined Vector and thought that he was using lightning magic and an iron coin as a conductor. The face of the village changed. It became stern and determined. Asul stretched out his hands in front of himself, and magic accumulated before them. He said that now the monster would die. Duel raised his hands in front of himself and released an ultra-electromagnetic charge attack. A stream of energy hit the dinosaur directly. Lightning wrapped around the monster's body. He opened his toothy maw, and his tongue began to stick out from it. The mage raised his hands in front of himself. The bright flash of his magic gradually faded. A through hole formed in the monster's body from the attack. Remnants of electricity passed through the body, and a dusty clump appeared around him. The monster raised its head, opened its jaws, and began to emit terrible sounds. Blood and smoke started to ooze from the wound in the monster's head. After some time, the monster began to stagger and eventually fell to the ground. A column of dust rose into the air from the impact. Instrument approached the monster's head. Sweat was running down his face, and he wiped the sweat with his hand. Instrument looked at the hole in the monster's head in surprise. Then Asul fell to the ground, spread his arms and legs, lay down and tried to catch his breath, closed his eyes, and said that it was hard for him to defeat the monster because his strength was almost exhausted. Haku and Abhai appeared in front of the village. The boys began to tell the soul that he had done well in the fight. They expected nothing less from Haku. Instrument blushed with embarrassment and said he was grateful to the boys for the praise and for how they handled the other monsters, and Haku smiled and replied that the village had nothing to fear. He and the bee had handled everything. Haku got up from the ground and said that the fight was over. Haku and bee rose into the air and flew away. Behind Haku, a view of the fir forest and mountains opened up. The village parents stood on a small road leading to the house. On both sides were front gardens. Behind the house were plowed fields. The village turned out to be on the other side of the road, where the parents stood. Instrument began to wave his hands cheerfully and greet his parents. The parents were very happy about the village's return. Instrument ran up to his parents, and they began to hug. The village parents hugged him and rejoiced, cheerfully naming the village by name. Instrument's father smiled, and tears of joy appeared on his mother's face. Instrument's mother said she had a lot to say, but first of all, she was very glad that Instrument had returned. Instrument lowered his head and began to apologize to his parents. Above the roof of the village house, the sky began to darken. The father of that soul approached him and said that they no longer needed to worry about the monster invasion. The father introduced the horde of monsters and added that this procession is called the migration of monsters. The peasants hid in the elder's house. Someone replied that there is nothing more to worry about. The village father began to smile and said that he did not know about the strength of his son. The soul responded to him with a smile. The instrument turned red and nervously touched the hat. He told his parents that he had their blessing and trained a lot. Then he touched the hat and looked away. The village parents watched him closely. Then the parents laughed loudly and said they did not know there was such a powerful blessing in the village, but he should not be so frivolous. Asul looked at his parents and smiled nervously. The parents continued to say that it was better to hide such power from others to avoid unnecessary problems. The village elder smiled and said he would go to the starosta, and the village and mother should wait here. The instrument smiled and said it could go with the father. The father began to walk and replied with a smile that he would manage on his own. The head could leave because everything was already over. Several days passed. A knight in armor came to the village. He held a letter before him and began to read that the son and his father must go to Margrave Randolph. That night, more soldiers stood in front of the village house. The man and his family looked at them in surprise, and he anxiously thought that his peace had been quickly disturbed. Instrument nervously looked at his father and began to tell exactly what the father had then said to the elder, and the father nervously looked away and remained silent. Drops of sweat ran down his father's face, and he said that at first he just told everyone to hide because when he and one other person entered the forest, he saw a horde of monsters approaching. The soldiers walked through a small area where the bodies of monsters lay, and the peasants walked with them. The soul remembered how he made a distracting explosion and thought that Lady Myrrh noticed it. The soldiers began to go to their wagons. Meanwhile, in the village, it was believed that because of this, an even bigger shack caused many problems, and the village had a bad reputation. One person got into the wagon with the soldiers and went to dupe. After some time, the soul and his father found themselves in front of a huge building. It was very beautiful and had many large windows. The village elder looked at this building in surprise. When they entered the building, the boy and his father walked down a long corridor behind the knights, and many girls in maid costumes stood by the walls. The tourist and his father found themselves in one of the rooms of the building, sat on carved chairs. A round table stood before them, and they were very worried and tired after the trip. Instrument frowned and thought that, as expected from a margrave, his decoration was much more luxurious than their farm. It was a completely different world, and he could only dream of such luxury. Instrument closed his eyes, then looked at his trembling father. He was very nervous and thought that his father looked more tense than him. In front of the village stood a girl with a tray and was placing cups on the table. Someone thought she might be a servant, but she had cat ears. When the village began to thank her, the girl shyly smiled, turned around, and left. Someone thought that he was seeing a beast person for the first time, and her ears were probably very soft to the touch. Instrument's father looked at him awkwardly and said that it seemed to him that this girl had such a gentle touch. Instrument looked at his father embarrassed, blinked, and thought that his father should be ashamed to say such things out loud. Behind the village appeared a man in a suit. He said that for the village it was really the first time seeing a beast person, and one person did not expect such a sudden appearance and got scared. He frowned, opened his mouth in surprise, and began to turn toward the voice. The man in the suit laughed and said that the villager had a strange facial expression, as if he was scared by him. Instrument frowned and thought that he needed to be careful because this man appeared too suddenly. The man leaned forward and introduced himself, saying his name was Heyman Laurel and that he was the chief butler. Instrument's father nervously responded, introducing himself. Instrument carefully examined the man and thought that to achieve such a status, a person must be extraordinary. He had already heard this splash somewhere. The man approached the door, looked at the boys, and said that he could escort Dusher and his father to the gentleman's office. He also apologized for the long wait. Dusher and his father watched and listened to the man attentively. Soon the boys found themselves in one of the rooms of the large building. The office had beautiful wooden furniture and a large window. The butler said that the meeting would take place here and that he would immediately call the master. A man entered the room. He was a blonde with a beard. He apologized for being late. Dusher and his father were sitting on the sofa. In front of them stood a wooden table with a tea set. Dusher's father looked nervously at the man. The man looked at the boys with a smile and said that his name was Randolph von Aristel. The king had given him the title of Margrave, and the guests were supposed to be Poole and his father Lart. The man sat opposite the village together with the father, smiled, and said that the boys probably already knew his name, and he would like to discuss the recent incident with them. Drops of sweat ran down the face of Avidal's father. He was not smiling yet. The village silently looked at him. The duke said that he wanted to get to the point. The man frowned at the boys and said that they were the first to see the approach of the monsters, so he asked them to tell about it in more detail, and the village elder was very nervous, while the village itself smiled kindly at the man. Sweat ran down the face of the village father. He smiled nervously and said that as soon as he saw the monsters, the first thing he did was inform the elder. The man put his hands on his legs and said that the village father was just a farmer, so he took his child to the forest. The father of the instrument nervously replied that they had run out of medicine, and the instrument helped gather herbs for them, and sometimes they went to the forest to hunt. The instrument thought that it was not in vain that he and the father practiced questions and answers. While the conversation went smoothly, the man put his hand on his chin and pondered, then closed his eyes and began to think more deeply, while the village elder looked at him and sweated. The man frowned and thought that there was logic in these words, but maybe the boys were deliberately hiding something. He suddenly began to say that maybe the procession happened because of them, and the village father and the village itself were very frightened. The village father folded his hands in front of him and nervously replied that the man was wrong, that he could swear by anything, but they were not guilty of anything, and Kull looked thoughtfully ahead. In the office, silence reigned for some time. The man thought that this would not be enough to convince the simple peasants that there were monsters here. Suspiciously, the farmer's son was too calm. Probably he was hiding something. The man imagined a battlefield with monsters, then said that there were no injuries, and the mage who examined this field decided that lightning magic was used in the fight. The village elder opened his mouth in surprise, then turned his gaze to his son. The soul sat in silence and listened to the man's story. The instrument turned away. He covered one eye and thought that by doing so he was asking the father not to look at him so openly. The man frowned and looked at the village. Then he said that a very outstanding mage had fought. The peasants clearly did not want to say anything to him. Someone sat silently. The man thought that Mur told him about a meeting with an unusual child. The instrument lowered his head. His face suddenly turned red, and he said that he was very scared then and remembered almost nothing. The man pointed to the elder's house and said that it was quite suspicious because that day everyone hid there, but no one saw the village itself there. The man looked suspiciously at the village and thought that he lied about it. The village began to get nervous. Probably, it was worth pressing him more. The instrument replied that he was really so scared that he hid from everyone. The man folded his hands and said that he was told that during the monster attack the village was in the forest. Drops of sweat ran down the soul's face, and he looked anxiously at the man. The instrument did not look at the man. The man thought that the instrument was trying to avert his gaze and was definitely hiding something. Then he looked angrily at the village and said that the village was also definitely hiding something, and the village was very scared. The instrument began to close his eyes, and they gradually darkened. The instrument thought that it was easier to fight monsters than to sit in interrogation, so he needed to figure out how to get out. The instrument's father fainted and lost consciousness. The instrument squeezed his eye, sweat ran down his face, and he thought that this was really the end of his quiet life. Suddenly, the door of the room opened, and a female voice sounded, a girl called Randolph. This was Mrs. Moore. The girl's hair was loose, and she was wearing a beautiful dress. An unusual mood was felt around Miss Karina. The hostess said that Randolph had to explain to her what was happening here. In front of him stood some kind of instrument, looking frightened. His mouth and eyes were wide open. He realized that Mrs. Moore had entered the office. The man frowned, turned his head toward where Mrs. Moore was standing, and called the girl by name. The instrument silently sat on the sofa and looked at the girl. Mrs. Moore looked sternly at the man. The man, smiling, began to say that they were just discussing important matters. Moore became completely gloomy. She approached the man and said that he had to be silent immediately. The man, feeling guilty, lowered his head and said that he would obey Moore. The soul, hearing this, opened its mouth wide in surprise. Moore began pointing a finger at the man's face and said that he had no right to pressure the child. Sweat flowed down his face, and he began to justify himself. She frowned even more. Her finger touched the man's nose, and she said that she had already told him to check everything carefully and not rely on intuition, while someone folded their hands and nervously watched what was happening. Moore's face became gloomy. A wicked smile appeared on it, and she said that the man deserved punishment, and she was ready to trample him. Moore clenched her fists and began to trample the man, and he began to scream with pleasure. The son and his father watched in fear. Moore turned to the stool and with a smile said that she had apologized to the stool and its father. The Margrave sometimes does that, and then thinks. Moore continued to step on the man's face. Moore stood over the Margrave, smiling, and said that she suggested forgetting this misunderstanding and going for tea. The soul looked at the girl confused and frightened. Tea began to be poured into mugs. Moore said that after the monster's walk they still had many questions. Someone kept their hands on their knees, and then replied that Moore was right. The village father looked ahead with a stupid expression and smiled. Moore approached the village and said he could do magic. Someone squinted one eye and replied that he could do a little. The girl put her hand on her chin and, smiling, pondered. another person frowned and became wary. The girl drank from the cup. The assistant held the cookie in his hands and looked at the rest. Then he thought that she definitely knew he had stopped the monsters, but she did not tell this to the Margrave. The assistant did not understand what Mur meant. The instrument bit off a piece of the song and got scared when it heard Mrs. Moore say the cookie is really very tasty. Moore looked into the cups she was holding and continued that these sweets are a real sensation in the capital, but they are hard to find, and someone listened to Moore in surprise. The girl approached the village and, smiling, said that it was very difficult for her even to get a basket of cookies and that someone should personally bake them for her family, and someone looked at her fearfully. The instrument turned red. He looked at Mura's smiling face and thought he understood everything. The lady hinted that she would overlook his participation in the battle, and the instrument was forced to bake these cookies for her. That idiot raised his hands up and thought that Mur had exposed him. There was no point in hiding anymore. He smiled, closed his eyes, and laughing, said that Mr. Lebrander also complained that these cookies were underbaked. The tool blushed, smiled, and said it heard that this cookie is very hard to bake, then thought it would not bake so many cookies. Moore smiled and said that maybe a merchant would be found who would buy cookies wholesale from the cook. Instrument frowned and began to smile nervously, smiled even more, and said that it was worth asking Mr. Lebrant about that man. Instrument thought he understood everything. The soul closed its eyes and said it was better to find out the recipe for this cookie. A wicked smile appeared on Mura's face. She approached the village and said that Lebrant does not know who the baker is. How did the village find out that a person can give the recipe? Moore said that if some guy knows about that person, then Lebrant is deliberately hiding his identity. That guy turned pale, looked away, and became even more nervous. Some instrument imagined a smiling Moore who held his head in her hands, and then he thought that he was caught, and now he would have to dance to her tune. Even the Margrave is not as scary as this woman. Mur approached the face of the village and, smiling, said that since then she wanted to become a friend of the village, because he did not mind. Sweat flowed from the face of the village, and he replied that only for such an offer. Then the soul smiled even more. She still held his head in her hands, and the girl said that she hoped that their friendship with the soul would last a very long time. The instrument and his father sat on the sofa. Mur sat opposite them. The instrument noted that he had brought his father to his senses, and they continued the conversation. The instrument thought about Miss Mur and decided that they had time to talk about their friendship. If the instrument creates something new, he immediately sends it to her, and their business partnership should not be interrupted. Some sycophant nervously looked at the smiling Lady Mur. The conversation ended when she said that they definitely should remain friends. The wagons began to move away from Mur's beautiful house, and Pud thought that Mur was not such a bad person, although she followed him and blackmailed him, and even gave a few things as gifts. The instrument and his father found themselves near their house. Their mother was waiting on the street with something in her hands. The instrument thought that the story about the procession ended with this, and this adventure brought them more benefit than harm. The father of the village was very frightened when he saw his wife. A gloomy atmosphere hung around the mother of the village. She looked angrily at the man because he was intently looking at the servant with cat ears. Several years passed. In ancient times it was quiet and peaceful. The girl sat in a cradle. She had a bib on her neck. The soul began to say that this little one is Siap. The instrument smiled widely and began to ask his sister how she was feeling. Then the village thought that their family had finally grown. He reached out his hands to his sister to take her. My mother stood nearby, smiled, and said that probably the village was going crazy because of his sister. He replied that mother was right because Sia was very sweet, and he thought about his sister's future. The instrument clenched his hand into a fist and with a smile said he would do everything possible so that she would live comfortably and carefree. He thought he was doing it not only for her, but also for his parents and himself. Happy parents stood in front of the village because thanks to the efforts of the villagers they decided to have a second child. They now need nothing. Their son is true gold. The villagers' faces turned red. He was surprised by the words of praise from his parents. That instrument turned even redder and began to smile and call the parents. Gradually, it started to get dark over the Adol family house. He thought that he had not been idle for the last few years. Instrument served many different dishes and thought that, among other things, Mrs. Moore helped him. She fetched various ingredients, and thanks to her he created many amazing things. A smokehouse oven appeared in the village. Previously, there was nothing like this in the world. This discovery became a hit. Someone thought that Mrs. Mur really loved smoking cheese. The instrument was introduced by Mrs. Mur. She covered the fan with her face. The instrument believed it gave more goods for big money and began sharing recipes with her, for which it received a percentage of sales. The village recalled a lively city street with shops, and the instrument thought that not only was everything fine with it, because Lebrant had opened his store in the capital, where he sold exclusive goods made by the instrument. The tool imagined its home and a small garden in front of it, and thought that thanks to these two it could not be called a poor farmer, it simply enjoys the rural carefree life. Murray and Aval met. The girl stood in front of the village with her hand raised and loudly called his name. Murray's face blushed slightly. Aval also blushed, smiled broadly, and called her by name. Mir closed her eyes and smiled widely. A new thought appeared that Mir is becoming more beautiful every day and increasingly resembles a young girl, and he sometimes gets nervous when he starts talking to her. His sister and Murray stood at the edge of the forest. Sister Alul sat on the ground and waved her hands cheerfully. Alul stretched out her hands in front of her and began to cast a spell. Murray was nearby. The image began to discuss the tricks possessed by the village. Murray approached the village and with a smile said that maybe today it would teach her something new. Ogle closed his eyes, smiled, and agreed with her proposal. An unusual atmosphere hung around them. All stretched out his hand in front of him and began to cast a spell. Mayuri stood nearby and watched what was happening. All noticed that lately she had been very interested in magic and decided to try to teach her water magic because he believed she had the ability for it. An unusual glow appeared. The boys were at home and started cooking. Odu thought that with the help of water magic Murray would be able to protect himself. Lately Murray often helped him with cooking and his culinary skills improved. Murray held a knife in her hands, then closed her eyes and laughed loudly. Hull thought that Murray often starts a conversation about marriage with Hull, and these words confuse him, although they are very close. After some time Afowl, his sister, and Murray found themselves in the forest again. Afowl began to create a small hurricane, and the girls laughed. Afowl thought that he and Murray spent a lot of time together and grew closer. This lasted until a certain moment. The village was quiet. The boys in the forest discussed that today's training could be finished. Meyer thanked the village for the help. Then Meyer handed the letter to Alul. The letter from the Margravine surprised Alul. The peasant took the letter in his hands and began to read carefully. From that moment, a series of difficult events began in the carefree life of the village. Mir stood nearby and looked at the letter in surprise, and behind them, the tall tops of fir trees were visible. The events moved to the capital of the Kingdom of Lyde. On the top of the mountain stood a large castle with high walls. Slightly below the mountain was a city spread on both sides of a wide river. The building had beautiful architecture. The roof was tiled. At the foot of the large building, there was a garden with stone figures. In one of the rooms on the table, there was a cup with a drink and a basket of cookies, and someone really liked the liver. The girl with thick hair and ponytails held cookies in her hands and looked at him. Then she said that liver is popular and sweet now. She thought that these cookies were the most ordinary and no different from others. The girl holds a cookie in her hands, brings it to her mouth and bites it, and a moment later her eyes open wide in surprise. Then the girl began to eat the cookie whole and said that it was very tasty. Everything about this cookie, from taste to size, is perfect. It is completely different from ordinary cookies. The girl's face flushed slightly. She turned to the man in the doorway and said she wanted to meet the one who made these cookies. The man's name was Albus. He placed his hand on his chest and, smiling, said that if the lady wished, he would try to find the man as soon as possible. She was wearing a dress with dark stripes. She continued eating cookies. Her face was covered in crumbs. Then she began talking to herself. She was surprised at how quickly the cookies were finished. She did not understand why everyone liked them. The events take place in the capital of the Kingdom of Layade, in the trading house Lebrant. On the square stood a small brick house. In front of it were shops, and many people walked around the square. Lebrant sat at a wooden table on which stood 2 frames and 2 iron cups. He held a letter in his hands and read it carefully. Then Lebrant began to sweat, wiped his face with his hand, and thought that he had just opened a case because the ducal family, the highest aristocracy, and even the royal family had taken an interest in the village. Albus stood by the shop counter, raised his hand, and smiled at the seller. Lebrant thought that recently the chief butler of the Adams family named Albus had tried to find out something from the merchants. Besides Albus, there were several other people on the square. A horse-drawn carriage was moving towards the mountains. Lebrant thought that he needed to meet Lady Moore as soon as possible, although it was unlikely they would manage to hide the village from such serious people. Lebrant found himself in Lady Moore's mansion. He raised his hand and said that all the noble families of the kingdom had begun to take an interest in the village. Lady Moore placed her hand on her face, closed her eyes, and pondered. Lebrant sat on the sofa. Moore sat opposite. Moore said that the matter had taken a serious turn, and to protect the village, communication with it needed to be limited. It was for its own good. Lebrant anxiously asked if there was another way out. A chandelier hung from the ceiling. Lebrant and Moore decided that the village should not find out about this for now, but Lebrant would still write him a letter with explanations. Several weeks passed, and the events moved to Lebrant's trading house. Albus stood by the counters and watched the buyers. The merchant gave a child a small package, and in another shop, a woman was choosing goods. Albus squinted and thought that there were fewer people than last week. All the goods had simply disappeared from this shop's counter, and a dark and mysterious atmosphere hovered around Albus. Albus squinted and thought that the goods that were in demand disappeared from the shelves too suddenly, and it was unlikely that one person did it. He had heard rumors about bacon, but did not believe them, and 2 horses stood at the end. Albus sat in the bar. A man in a suit sat in front of him. Albus thought that 10 peasants from one village could buy bacon cheaper than in the capital. Aldred raised his hand and asked the bartender for a bottle of ale. There were many tables and visitors in the establishment, and Albus held a mug with a drink in his hands. The bartender said that once they had a guy from that village who was treated with bacon, and he really liked it. Albus closed his eyes, smiled, and began to say that maybe the bartender remembers the name of the village where that guy was from. The man put his hand to his chin and thought, then said that he could not remember, but that village was very strange. Behind him was a counter, on the pegs of which stood various glass bottles with liquids. Albus imagined a horde of various armed monsters. The bartender said that there was an invasion in the village, but it was stopped in half a day. No one was hurt in the battle because the people were protected by God himself. Albus narrowed his eyes and replied that he had heard about that event. It was quiet in the castle on the high hill. Albus found himself in a room full of books. He thought it was an ordinary rumor because everyone talked about it. Albus looked at a book with inscriptions and a small map. He thought that there could be many versions of what was happening, and it seemed strange to him. Then he said aloud the name of the village Onan. But after some time, Albus found himself in the guild as a merchant. The man behind the counter said that he heard about such a village for the first time. All the merchants of the guild were from more developed cities. There were bills on the counter, and sacks and wooden barrels stood behind. Fluffy clouds floated over the building with the Libra coat of arms, and Albus thought that someone controlled the flow of information. Then he found himself in the Adventurers Guild, where he was told that they had no right to disclose information about Avnan's whereabouts. The man with a scar on his face held a mug and smiled. Then he said that there were definitely no hunters in the village Onan. The food there was tasty and inexpensive. There was also a lot of work. It was truly a wonderful land. Soon a festival would begin there. Albus poured a drink into the mug held by the man with a scar on his face. Albus thought that he finally found a clue. The man with the scar thanked Albus for his generosity. Someone in a hood was thoughtfully looking at the man with the scar. In a large field surrounded by forest, many people set up their tents, and carts with various goods stood in the field. Owl and Myri stood near the shop. Owl said that this year's harvest festival promises to be fun. Myri replied that all the residents of neighboring villages participate in this celebration every year. Murai smiled broadly and said that this is already the 3rd year she has worked at the stall together with the villagers. Azul closed his eyes and smiled in response, thanking Murai. She always helped him. This year they need to try hard. Several cows were grazing in the field. In the village, they thought the harvest festival would last 2 days. There would also be a contest for the popularity of the stalls. 2 cows would be given for the victory. 1 cow costs 50 gold coins. The stalls were built very quickly. People were busy working, and the village came alive because of the prize. Neighboring villages also decided to participate. This year there are twice as many stalls. Previously, the event was not held on such a scale. A dark-haired man approached the village. He had many wrinkles on his forehead. He smiled and asked how things were in the village. Sewell responded with a smile and said he was glad to welcome the elder and that everything was fine with him. The face of the village blushed a little. He said thoughtfully why the elder decided to change the celebration so radically. The elder closed his eyes and, laughing, said that it happened thanks to the village. The man framed an image of the old village and its transformed appearance, then said that the youth tried to leave it as soon as possible, but because of the community's actions, the Margrave family began to grant privileges to the village, and it changed. The man looked at the village and said that as a sign of gratitude, he decided to hold this contest. Everyone is sure that the village stall will win this year. Azul considered this unfair, and the man began to calm him down. And Kull thought that he definitely loves his land, but he did it not for the development of the village, although if the elder and everyone else are satisfied, one should just accept it. The man with a scar on his face turned out to be next to the elder in the village. He raised his hand and greeted the residents. The elder addressed him and said that this is indeed Mr. Glenn. He had worked well there as always. There was an animal in the cart. The elder closed his eyes and slightly bowed his head, then said that he sees Glenn's escort in these parts for the first time and that he himself is the elder of this village. His name is Maruga. Albus placed his hand on his stomach and responded with a bow. Then he smiled and said he was grateful for the hospitality. His name is Albus. He is the butler of the Duchy of Adams. At that time, at the Margrave's estate, they shouted even more fiercely that the butler of the ducal family had indeed arrived in the village of Onan. She could not allow the butler to take control of the village, so Jane Jammin had to prepare the carriage, and the man in the suit obeyed even more. Moore frowned and clenched her teeth, saying that this boy belonged to her, and she would not allow anyone to take away his freedom, and in her hands she clenched a folded fan. The next morning came. Today the harvest festival begins. Birds were flying over the mountains. The carriage was leaving the house, pulled by 2 horses. There were fields and lush trees near the houses. A blond man with long hair sat in the carriage and said that the one who prepared that sweet dish really lives in a boring backwater. The dark-haired man replied that it was true. There could be no mistake. The carriage approached a 2-story house. Gal said that there was nothing wrong with this revenge. This man would have to bow before him to earn the honor of working for the second son of Count Phylan. Sura said that he needed to talk to the elder. Cyrus entered the house, placed his hand on his chest, and apologized for such a sudden visit. He was the butler of the Falling district. His name was Cyrus, and he asked the host to give him some time. Cyrus angrily looked toward where Albus was standing. The man found himself in the corridor, and laughing, began to say that he did not expect to meet the steward of the Count's family in such a remote village. The floor was covered with wooden boards. Cyrus looked at Albus and said that he was a servant of the Duchy of Adams. Albus closed his eyes and smiled, replying that his name was Albus. The men began to talk about the elder's whereabouts and what they both had forgotten here. Sapirus smiled ominously and said that he was only following the orders of his teacher, but he believed that their goals coincided with Albus's goals. Albus smiled ominously and agreed with Sapirus's words. Zura said that he wanted to talk to the elder, but he was not there, so he had to leave. A man with a scar on his face entered the house and asked why the Count's family was in the village, and Albus replied that they had probably come to the village for sweets. The men continued to talk about the Count's family. A dark cloud appeared over the house. Elvis closed his eyes and thought that the rumors about the Count's son turned out to be true. The boy was greedy for money and power. He really wanted to become a supplier of sweets. Albus opened his eyes, looked seriously to the side, and said that the Count's son would do everything to rise to the top, and waited to find out what his next move would be. People raised their hands and rejoiced because the elders announced the beginning of the harvest festival in the village of One. Flags were hung on the tops of the erected tents. Benches stood close to each other. Sellers offered buyers various goods. Near some tents stood wooden barrels. Many guests walked between the rows and examined the goods. All and Murray stood behind the counter of their tent. There were various things on it. A huge line of people who wanted to buy goods at the children's store lined up near them. Murray looked at the crowd in surprise and felt uneasy inside. The boys looked at each other, smiled, and began to say that this year they really had many clients. They needed to try to serve everyone. Both stood on the trading bench and sold products, while Murray stood in front of the people and invited them. After some time it became much quieter and calmer. His face turned red. He wiped drops of sweat with his hand, and the village closed its eyes and said that after lunch there were fewer people, so they should also take a break and have lunch. The Count's second son began to make his way through the crowd, pushing people and complaining that the owner of this shop really bakes cookies, and he wanted to get them right now and demanded that they be brought to him immediately. Murray and Aval looked at the man in surprise. Murray began to say that maybe Aval knew who he was. Aval replied that he was a typical arrogant and stupid aristocrat. The Count's second son shouted, waved his hands, and scared people. Murray replied that in that case the village should not welcome this person, and she would serve him herself. Murray approached the man from behind, held cookies in her hands, and with a smile said that maybe the gentleman wanted to buy cookies. The man was surprised. Madness appeared in the man's eyes. He began to smile strangely and looked at Murray. Murray looked at the man in surprise and was silent. Then the man began to shout that Murray was very beautiful and would become his wife. Murray was surprised. The man spread his arms to the sides and, closing his eyes, began to shout that she would become the wife of the head of the Philil district. Then he began to promise Mir various things. Mir smiled and extended her hand forward as a sign of refusal. The man nervously began to shout that he wanted to hear the reason for the refusal, and Murray began to shove cookies into his mouth and say that no one would cooperate with him, so he should eat the cookies and leave. The village was on the outskirts. Nearby stood other residents who laughed and watched the process, and Onul nervously smiled and said that Murray has a sharp tongue. The man even blushed, clenched his fist, and shouted that the boys would still remember him. Osul and Myri looked surprised at the one who was leaving. The guests stood by the stalls and laughed at him. Myri opened her mouth in surprise and said that the man left and didn't even pay. Onul laughingly said that it was not worth paying attention to him. The event continued, and many people looked at the shops with goods. A cart harnessed with 2 horses was leaving the village. 2 men sat in it. Sedarist closed his eyes and said that he could, if the Lord would listen to him. The earl's son sat frowning and waited for the conversation with Sedarist to continue. The man recalled the smiling faces of the boys and said that Samaris should monitor the village, find out about everyone this girl communicates with, and find the one she is in love with. Samaris was ready to fulfill his master's will. The count's son clenched his fist. An evil smile appeared on his face, and he said that he would personally deal with Mayuri's lover, and she would have no choice but to fall at his feet. A very gloomy atmosphere hung around him. The cart harnessed with 2 horses stopped near a 2-story house. The count's son laughed so loudly that he was heard throughout the street. Someone stood behind a tree and eavesdropped on the conversation between the count's son and his servant. Albus came to that man's shop, raised his hand, and with a smile said that maybe Murray baked the cookies, and if not, he would talk to the cook. Murray looked at the man in surprise, and behind Albus stood a queue. Murray blushed. She said that an aristocrat had come to the village again, but this time he was handsome and polite. The man looked like a butler, and Elle in a cap looked at Murray awkwardly. The instrument approached Albus and said that he was sorry, then remembered that he himself had made the cookies. Albus replied that he was sorry for distracting the stool and added that his sweets were extremely tasty, and the instrument thanked Albus for the praise. The man slightly raised his hands and shyly said that maybe he could help Albus with something, and Albus closed his eyes and, smiling, said that he just wanted to meet the one who created such an exquisite thing. The instrument frowned a little and looked at the man, then thought that this man inspires trust with his words, but something mysterious devours him. Itul said that this was the only reason why that man called him, looked long and tiredly at Albus, and Albus slightly smiled and leaned a little towards his face. An unusually tense atmosphere hung around the boys. Albus smiled a little and said that it was rare for such a young boy to understand everything immediately, and that someone could go with him to the capital, and smiling, that someone replied that such a boy should not spend time with strangers. Albus placed his hand on his chest, closed his eyes, and said that probably the village was struggling. His name is Albus. He is the butler of the Ducal Alums family. People gathered around him and slowly chose goods in the shops. Duel leaned a little and said that the man could call him a sul, but for that, he would have to go to the capital with Albus. Albus said that his lady wanted to personally meet the creator of this popular delicacy. The instrument smiled, leaned forward a little, and replied that he was, of course, pleased, but he was not sure about the correctness of this act. Albus said that this trip should be rewarded and suggested starting with 10 gold coins. It remains to find out what the village will say. The instrument began to smile nervously and thought that 10 gold coins, that is, 1,000,000 yen, was an attractive offer. The instrument replied that it was attractive, but he would think about it. Alba, laughing, said that he understood everything. Albus pressed his hand to his chest, turned to the village, and said that he would live in the elder's house for some time. If the village changed its mind, they would find him there, and now it was time for him to go. Asu would listen carefully to the man. Albus began to leave the village. The soul looked into the distance and thought that this butler really came to bring the creator to meet his mistress. It looked very strange. Something was clearly wrong here. Night came and a large moon appeared from behind the clouds. People continued to walk the market and choose goods. A lit torch was attached to each stall, illuminating the trading area. A cart drawn by 2 horses stood far from the trading square near the elder's house. The duke's son, Frond, began to shout that Lee Sarahs had learned about some man named Asul. The trading square was very bright and noisy. Sarah closed his eyes and began to say that he had learned everything. Asul is the creator of cookies, bacon, soap, lavash, and more. All the main products from the Lebrant house were created by a boy named Asul. The Sarons remembered the face of the wool in Muri and continued to talk about a young lady named Muri. It seems she sympathizes with the wool. The girl knows all the recipes, so she helps him in production. The count's son looked at Siras and began shouting that it was definitely true. Maybe he would just deal with the village and capture Muri. Siras closed his eyes and lowered his head. Then he said that the Lord was right. The face of the count's son became angry. He looked at Suras and ordered him to get rid of this boy today without unnecessary witnesses. That is an order. Surner looked at his master and was ready to carry out the order. The atmosphere was eerie. A tall man was walking beside a cart pulled by 2 horses. He was dressed all in black. His face was not visible. He wore a hat and a scarf. The duke's son laughed maliciously and shouted that he would get rid of the boy and obtain the woman of his dreams and knowledge as a bonus. Today luck was clearly on his side. The duke's son found himself alone in the carriage, and someone began knocking on the carriage door. A voice outside greeted with good evening and said he wanted to talk to the lord about the village. The duke's son decided to go out and talk to the stranger. The Duke's son stepped out of the carriage, clenched his fists, and began to look around. The man nervously said that the stranger must appear and explain what he wanted. The carriage doors were open, and it was dark outside. Gradually, the atmosphere grew even darker. A black silhouette of a stranger appeared behind the Duke's son. He was holding something in his hands and began swinging at the man. The Duke's son stood and frowned to the side. A loud explosion sounded in a moment, and drops of blood splattered in the air. The carriage was still open, and bright light was falling on it. After some time, the village became very quiet. The residents began to disperse and return to their homes. Near one of the houses stood a black silhouette of a stranger. Next to the house was a freshly plowed garden. The main character lies on his side and sleeps so sweetly that drool drips from his chin. Suddenly, his sleep is disturbed by suspicious rustle. Waking up, the hero convulsively remembers that his house is safe because he cast a detection spell on it to protect against thieves and feels that someone is near the wall of the house. Using spatial vision, the young man notices that the stranger is holding a weapon in his right hand and concludes that he is not just a drunkard, because drunkards usually do not carry such a thing. The boy slowly dissolves into the air using magic and becomes invisible to attack first. He will not forgive the one who disturbed his sleep. At that moment, the stranger who came to deal with the main character frowned because he cannot notice him. He does not see his mana, and this surprises him greatly, because a second ago the young man was in place. Suddenly, the main character appears behind the stranger, and he froze in surprise. He asks what the man in black left near his house so late. The instrument looks at the stranger indignantly and questioningly, and the stranger, frightened by its voice, jumps back and simultaneously throws a weapon at the young man. He deflects the blade, strikes with his strength, spreads his arms to the sides, does not stop the magic, intensifies it even more, and counterattacks the opponent. The young man's power hits the shield that the mercenary quickly raised, but the blow still weakens the latter's legs. The young man squints and begins to think about the stranger, because he believes that he is a mage who easily dodges and uses a shield, and wonders how long he will hold out. The main character begins to summon small air vortices, resembling tornadoes, to test the strength and endurance of the stranger. Having finished summoning the hurricanes to himself, the boy directs them all into the unknown, and simultaneously, while uttering a spell, the earth explodes around the stranger. When the young man struck the opponent, dust rose around, and he thought he finally hit, but when the dust cleared, he saw only the killer's cloak falling to the ground. But the man picks up the cloak, and with disappointment on his face, carefully examines it for evidence that could point to the attacker. The main character thinks that the stranger is still at large, but the blow was still worth it. He is sure that the man will not die, although seriously wounded and unlikely to try attacking again. The soul itches the head, turns around and goes to the house, thinking that now it can finally go to sleep. Quiet morning in the house near the mountains is interrupted by a scream. A boy runs up to the girl who is screaming and asks what happened. The girl points aside and says anxiously that there is a man lying there, covered in blood. Mir leads the young man to the man who is seriously wounded. The blow hit the head, so he lost consciousness and is writhing in severe pain. The main character leans toward the man and says that he is the aristocrat who recently sailed with his friend. She replies that she thought he was drunk, so he was sleeping, but then she saw the blood. The crowd gathered around the stranger lying on his stomach begins to talk among themselves, and noise arises. The young man is disturbed by this and asks everyone to remain calm. Suddenly, a girl in a luxurious dress pushes through the crowd, says that she is the count's wife, promises everyone that she will deal with this incident, and then asks everyone to leave the crime scene. The lady who just approached looks at the lackey who spoke with the main character yesterday and asks him to help with the investigation. Mr. Albus replies that he understands everything because the count's son was injured on her land. The man with white hair begins to look around and says that he does not see the butler of the filial family nearby, and these words cause surprise on the young man's face. The instrument dives into memories and thinks that the one who attacked him at night might be the same butler. Suddenly, the boy felt gazes on him. It was Magro's wife who leaned toward him and asked him to come over, which caused a wave of embarrassment and misunderstandings. The girl puts her hands on her hips, leans toward the boy and says that he knows something and asks him to share it. The boy at first pretends not to understand what she means, then agrees to tell everything. Looking around, the main character tells about the incident with the knight. The count's wife asks if the Filelli family butler attacked him at night, then says that there were rumors that he once worked as a spy for the crown. The girl leans even closer to the village, which greatly embarrassed the residents, and promises that she will not say how he coped with it, instead asking him to be smart and help find the culprit of the incident, and the boy says that they will do everything possible. The butler, still examining the body of the man lying there, says that he does not feel traces of magic, so the attacker must have used a blunt object, although the victim is bleeding. The wound does not look serious, so it is worth taking him to the house. In a moment, everyone looks at the wound and notices something strange. The girl in the hat says that a white powder remained on the unconscious man's head, and the young man wonders why this dust is needed. The butler joins the couple who were still thinking about what they found earlier and says that it is best to question the residents, because they might have noticed something unusual that day. The heroine agrees and says that they need to go around the village. 3 people investigating the crime walk the streets and ask passersby if they saw anything suspicious last night. The first man who stands in the hero's way says that he drank yesterday, so he remembers nothing. But some of the men turn out to be useful and report about a dark-haired butler who is interested in the friends' relationships and went around all the stalls looking for something. The butler, who is helping with the investigation, gently smiles and asks a visitor to the street market if he saw a bloody blunt object. To such a question, one of the women says that she saw nothing. Then on the way of a gray-haired man, a dark-haired man meets him, who again talks about the man in black. The butler realizes that all the residents are talking about that servant from the Philo family, and the fact that so many people saw him seems very strange to him. At this time, Magra's wife questions all the villagers about how they behaved with the victims and whether he had enemies. Too many people saw him, so the man finds it strange. The blonde woman in a headscarf with no expression on her face says that the man who was recently found with a broken head behaved like the center of the world, so it is not surprising that someone tried to kill him. The next passerby with anger on his face says that the victim was hated. Everyone had time to complain to the elder about his behavior, although he had been in the village for only 1 day. The old man who was also bothering the girl called the man, who had been wounded by someone unknown, an ill-mannered boy with money instead of brains, and said that he annoyed everyone with his presence. Summarizing, the heroes say they found little information and advised talking to the village head, who listened to all the complaints of the residents about the brazen traveler. 3 went to the village elder. The dark-haired man reported that many residents came and complained about the behavior of the stranger. He also said that he was a simple nobleman and asked people not to pay attention to him, but there were no particularly outraged. The elder says that he is holding the celebration for the first time 2 days in a row, so he wanted to discuss this matter with Mr. Albus. He does not want bad memories to remain from the celebration. The butler and the main character do not respond to this. The girl asks why the man decided to spend this year's holiday for a whole 2 days. The dark-haired man says that the lady should know about the village's problem, where the youth usually leave, but in recent years, the population has grown so much that he never even dreamed of. Suddenly, the village head began to bow and announced that such an increase in the village population appeared thanks to the efforts of the residents, and his behavior made the young hero blush. The boy stammers, spreads his hands, and asks the adult to raise his head, saying there is no need to thank him, while the young man blurts out that he loves the village just as much as the man with the lowered head. The girl puts her palm to her face and sadly says that in the end they have no suspect who could have committed the crime against the high-ranking person. Albus closes his eyes. The blonde notices this. The man thinks that the words said earlier were understood differently in the village, and this surprises the boy. The main character is surprised at how the butler understood everything, and at that moment simply laughs, then asks the adventurers to search the village for the presence of the crime weapon. A young man confidently walks in the opposite direction from his colleagues and says that he and the butler must meet that man once more and have a serious talk with him. Mrs. McGraw's wife looks at both men with confusion and asks what their actions and words mean, whether they want to say that they know who the criminal is. The girl looks skeptical again. She says that Mrs. Mule's residence is located in a rather inconspicuous corner. No one saw suspicious people, and it is unclear how they found out everything. The man says that it is hard for him to admit this, but he will try to explain everything to his comrade. He claims that at first several witnesses deliberately lied to them. The young man recalled 3 men whom the group of investigators questioned first, who said they were drunk all night, and then said that they were the ones who deceived him. The boy continues to explain and wonders how people found out that Hals was just lying bloodied near his house, if no one exactly said when the man fell. The boy notices that the word night is repeated in all testimonies, but it is unclear why everyone believes that the attack happened specifically at night. The villagers lied because they have strong solidarity. They knew who the culprit was and did everything not to name him even to the gentleman, and the hero, as an ordinary villager, understands why people acted that way. Immersed in thought, the main character tries to reach a conclusion. then says that the criminal is an important figure among the villagers, and he is the one who introduces himself to all the nobles when they arrive. If the young man looks at the hunched man behind him and asks the village head if he understands what he is talking about, the interlocutor, covering his tired eyes, suddenly starts laughing and says that nothing can be hidden from the main character. The girl, with sorrow in her eyes, asks the elder why he acted that way. The village head responded that he had a simple motive, because the Houses wanted to kill a person and force Mikaeu to marry. The dark-haired man continues to say that he is very grateful to the boy for everything he has done. He loves every resident of this village like his own child, so he simply cannot close his eyes to Hal's words. Mrs. Mule and the butler observed the conversation and then asked where the murder weapon was, because they did not find it. The young man wonders if the weapon was a piece of rock salt and asks for confirmation of his words. The elder looks very surprised. The man says he expected nothing else from the main character, then adds that he was right, it really was rock salt. A lot of it was prepared for the festival, and then simply dissolved in water. The girl in the hat confidently reports that they finally found the murder weapon. This makes the butler laugh. Then he says that now the whole truth has become known. The countess confidently says that recently she has heard about goblin and orc attacks on the village, and asks if it is true, but the elder does not understand what is being talked about. The man says that sometimes orcs come out of the forest in small groups, but they do not cause much harm. Mrs. Mule, however, continues to insist that it was because of them that the weapon and witnesses were not found. With a barely noticeable expression on her face, the countess says that the wound on Mr. Phalel's head is very similar to a wound from a club that orcs usually carry with them, and then looks for confirmation in Albus's eyes. Albus raises his head and laughs. Then he says that it really was just a monster attack. The girl is right. All these words confuse the village elder. But Mrs. Mule asks the butler to help her write a report about this crime, and he replies that he will do everything himself because it is very simple, since they have already decided that orcs attacked the Marquis's second son at night. The gray-haired man glanced slyly at the girl and looked into her eyes, assuring her that he would fulfill any of her whims in exchange for donations, and she says she does not mind, but wonders how much it will cost her. Countess Bowser squinted thoughtfully, looked back, and asked if the payment would be considered the village transferring to the capital. This sudden proposal surprised the young man. The butler says that her proposal sounds very attractive, so he cannot refuse, and the girl replies that she has long cared about the village, so he must repay her in kind. The village elder begins to shout indignantly that only he should be punished. A friendly man with a sly smile says that the attack on the count's son is a serious crime, so not only the village leader, but also the residents themselves may suffer. Then the butler asks the elder for permission to help him in his village, so he has to obediently follow their plan and asks them to confirm that they understood him. The elder is reassured that if the village transfers to the Duchy of Atoms, everything will be fine because they do not think about money and power there, which is very rare among aristocrats. There is no better place to live. But even if the main character refuses, sooner or later aristocrats like Hal's will come for him, and not only he but the entire village will suffer. The young man stands up and says that he stirred up all the disputes because he loves the village and all its inhabitants and still owes Lady Mule, so he agrees to the proposal. The elder again bows his head before the boy, says that it is all because of him, and asks the boy for forgiveness. The instrument spread his hands and says that the main character of this village should not have bowed his head so easily because he thought about the main character and the safety of Miss Ri. He just wanted to do the right thing. The boy finishes the monologue, once again asks not to resort to bad deeds and to resolve everything peacefully, and the elder responds with another thank you. The next day it was announced that the son of Marquilla Faltiel was attacked by monsters, and those few villagers who knew the truth remained silent all their lives about what really happened. Soon Mr. Gals woke up and remembered what had really happened to him, but Mrs. Mule gently made him understand that if he tried to do anything, she would remind him what his butler had done. The incident was resolved, and the harvest festival still went well despite what happened. According to the voting results, the first place was taken by the Miri store and the village. In a few days, the main character was to travel to the Duchy of Atoms. His parents came to see him off and insisted that he eat well, and the young man promised to bring them souvenirs from the capital. The elder says that it is not easy for the peasants to live in the capital, but he believes that the boy will succeed and everyone will wait for his return. The boy thanks me for such kind words. A female acquaintance runs up to the young man and says that before his return from the duchy she will try to become a good bride. These words surprise the hero. The instrument looks at the woman from behind, thinking it will return next spring, and does not understand what his mother, who meanwhile puts on an innocent look, is planning. Without warning, Mari approaches the young man and kisses him on the cheek. After that, the boy stands with his eyes wide open. The main character holds his cheek and looks indignantly at the girl. She is also embarrassed and says that this is her magical talisman that will not allow him to seduce beauties in the capital. It is time for the boy to leave, and he approaches the gates leading out of the city. Then his girlfriend stops him and says that she almost forgot something. The girl gives the boy a neatly folded letter and asks him to open it as soon as he arrives in the capital. Someone is surprised that Maizri wrote him a message. The young man's face shows suspicion because he thinks it's a joke and doesn't understand why he was sent a letter. He believes his mother is too ashamed to say it directly, so she decided to inform him this way. The main character approaches the carriage, stops, and waves to his family and girlfriend, who shout him wishes for a safe journey. As soon as the young man sits in the carriage next to Albus, he says that he has been busy all this time, so they couldn't calmly talk and discuss why the duchy needs this village. The man confidently says that he was definitely called to another place, but not at all to rest there, and the butler tells me that he is, of course, right. Albus reports that the girl wants to eat the food that the peasants cook every day, so he suggested that the main character teach the village cooks to prepare according to his recipes, of course for generous pay. The young man says he expected something like that. He assures that his products are clearly of expensive quality. To this, the young duchess's servant confidently replies that he should not ask for an inflated price for them. After a long conversation, Mr. Albus taught the young man to drive the carriage. Then he told a little about the capital and the work that awaits him. Eventually, the pair of heroes began to approach the duchy. The main character admires it and enthusiastically tells her that the capital is huge. The instrument finally opens the letter and says that his mother asked him to read this message as soon as he arrives in the capital, so while they are traveling is the perfect time to do it. After that, his shout echoes across the field. The first lines of the letter say that the mother writes a message to her dear son, who has probably already arrived in the capital. This letter is about the village itself. She writes further that in every way her son is extraordinarily gifted, and as a mother, she does not want his knowledge of the world to be limited to just a small village. Because of these past thoughts, she asked Mr. Albus to allow her to take the entrance exams to the Academy of Magic Ruins in the capital. Enrollment there will begin in the spring. The message says that after 3 years of study at the academy, he should set out on a journey to see the world and earn more money. The mother also told the young man about Maria. Maria came to the mother and asked to be taught how to become a better wife, so the mother began to teach her. If the boy finds a better girl, the mother will take care of his girl. Before enrollment, the young man was allowed to stay in the duchy, but as soon as he enrolls, he will be able to move to the academy dormitory and fully support himself independently. And finally, the young man understood what his girlfriend meant when she said that before leaving, but he is outraged that the family forgot to ask for his opinion. He thinks that his mother understood that by agreeing to the trip to the capital, he actually wants to enter the magic academy and see the world, and he knows that his mother is wise and understanding. The boy understands that he agrees to all the proposals because the residents of the Adams Duchy do not seem bad yet, so he decides to settle a little in the royal capital. Albus notices the young man next to him and asks if he has read the letter to the end, and also says that he hopes for a long cooperation. The village confirms that it has probably long been connected with their family. The butler jokingly says that they will talk about entering the Magic Academy next year. Now they will arrive soon. The young man is impressed by how huge the Duke's house is. As soon as the stool enters, all the servants line up before him and greet him. Then the boy is led to the room assigned to him and later taken to the bathroom. After the bathing procedures, the main character is led to the dining room, where he is served luxurious dishes made from various products. Albus, watching how the young man eats, asks if he likes living in the mansion, and he cannot find words to describe their home. After the meal, the young man is led to the young lady. She comes out before him, greets him, and says that her name is Adam von Alistrat and that she is the eldest daughter of the Adam family. The girl apologizes in advance for rudeness, but asks if he is a real cookie maker. The soul apologizes in advance for impolite words and says that he is a commoner. A second later, the man hands the young woman a basket of muffins and offers her to try his baking. She bites off a piece of one of the cookies. The eldest daughter of the Adam family takes the main character by the hands, saying that this is exactly what she needs, and adds that she can't believe a child came up with it, but is very glad to meet them. The young man says embarrassedly that he is also glad to see the Duchess, who says that she can simply be called Alice and that there is no need to speak to her formally. The girl insists that she invited the hero here, so she considers him her property and assures that her family treats common people with respect, so they will not demand from him what he was not taught. The instrument, looking at the lackey, says that since Alice allows it, from now on he will live in her duchy until the spring of next year, and adds that he is very glad to meet the young lady. The girl is shy about such words from the young man and says that he is too polite to her, although they are the same age. The boy agrees and asks for permission to ask her one question. The main character finally asked the question that had been tormenting him all the way, why the young duchess wanted to see him, and she said there were several reasons. At first, Alice says she was naturally curious, interested in seeing the one who created something new in the confectionery business, and she has one more small request. The girl says she would like to ask him to help organize a banquet that will soon take place at their estate. The young duchess promises to pay all expenses and his participation, and wants him to pass his recipes to the cooks in her house. But of course, he can cook everything himself, although only 2 weeks remain until her birthday. The main character looks at her with indignation and understands why he was brought here and what they really want from him, but decides to endure everything because he will live there until spring, so he decides to tell all the recipes. The boy understands that a cake is needed for the birthday, but in the world he found himself in, no one has baked it yet, and he did not know about it, and the village believes that having many cooks will allow them to expand their capabilities. The young man thinks that since his client is a duchess, he can enlist her favor and, if necessary, ask her for help, so he considers this a rather advantageous exchange. The main character slowly nods his head and says that he agrees with the young duchess's proposal. She folds her hands in front of her and is very happy. The young man spreads his hands and says that the banquet details can be discussed later, but now he asks the butler and the lady to bring fresh milk and eggs. Alice happily says that they bought a couple of things and a bag of sugar at the sale, and the man says not to worry because he can use his own sugar. With these words, the young man surprised both the Duchess and Albus, and they asked the youth if he really supplied quality sugar to the capital. The peasants asked to keep this information secret. The servant of Duke Adam says that of course he will keep the secret, but all the nobles in the capital are chasing after sugar. The girl asks who he really is. The young man shyly smiles, then awkwardly laughs and says that he is an ordinary farmer. After this conversation, the main character began restless days. At first, the cooks in the Duke's estate treated him hostilely, but when he ended up in the kitchen, they began to treat him with respect. The kitchen staff began to admire the young man, and later started to consider him the head chef. A few minutes later, Alice appeared in the kitchen, saw the trial portions of new dishes, and immediately ate them with an expression of satisfaction on her face. 500 people were invited to the ball. While the chef was preparing trial portions of dishes, he also served them to the Duke and Duchess, who turned out to be pleasant people. They also held a meeting with Mr. Albus, the cooks, and the servants to carefully plan the dishes that would be served at the ball. There were about 500 guests, so it was necessary to carefully consider how many and which dishes to prepare. This was complicated by the fact that some ingredients were scarce. Of all the sweets, the servants' council chose the apple pie because there was enough dough and apples, and the servants liked it. In the last few days, the maids often came to the kitchen, approached the hero, and asked what kind of girls he liked, but maybe they were only interested in him out of politeness. The main character asked Alice not to go to the kitchen anymore, and she did not like it. Then he explained that it was her birthday, so everyone wanted to surprise her, but she did not allow them to do so. And so the days of the young cook passed, and with each day there was less and less time left until his birthday. The menu was agreed upon, the products were ordered, and they were supposed to arrive this evening, so the village had a day off for the first time in a long time. Since the young man is resting today, he first decided to go somewhere, and later met with Mr. Lebrun, who was very glad that the hero had come to the capital. The boy told his story, and ended with the words that this is how he started working for the Adams Duchy. The man regrets that it was hard for the youth, and offers his help if needed. The brilliant cook smiles happily, because he achieved what he started the conversation for, and says that he has a request for an old acquaintance. These words surprise the long-haired man. At the end of the conversation with Mr. Lebrun, the young man decided to go to the realtor's office. He enters, greets, and says that he wants to rent a house. After the birthday, affairs in the village and duchy were completed. He was allowed to live in the manor until spring, but he did not want to burden others with his presence and wanted to live for himself without being overloaded with work. Since he lives alone in the capital, he definitely needs a house. The boy calls the realtor again, who says he is already coming to him. The agency employee is surprised because a child came to his office. The child says he wants to rent a house or a room near the academy, but the employee is not sure if he can rent a room to a child. The The man gives the realtor a paper he received in the duchy, asks him to look at it. The realtor reads it with surprise and understands how important this document is. The agency employee apologizes for the rudeness and asks for a minute to offer him a wonderful option, and the guy is glad that he previously consulted Albus for advice. A little later, a huge two-story house appears before the guy, shining with luxury and cleanliness. The man asks the main character what he thinks about this house. The employee says that it is a two-story mansion with 4 rooms and a garden, only 20 minutes on foot to the academy, and most importantly, there is a simply huge living room, so this is the best option. The guy is surprised that the main room is really huge, about 25 square meters, a sofa fits there, and he considers this place a real fairy tale. If it is about rent, the luxurious dwelling costs 45 gold per month, and if the village buys it, it will pay about 9,000, and the hero, having considered all the charms of the house, sees no reason to refuse. The main character still hesitates, but remembers that the duchy recommended this realtor, so he agrees and buys the house, and the man suggests discussing the contract details. But the employee was surprised because he thought the guy meant rent, not purchase, and he takes out his savings and offers to pay the entire amount immediately. Soon, furniture appeared in the young man's new dwelling, and he began to call it a dream house. He remembers that he has to show the prince's letter to the seller in the furniture store again. The young man looks around and thinks that he is not sure if the letter was the reason, but all the furniture looks very luxurious, although he, of course, paid a lot for it. In the store, he was overwhelmed with nostalgia when he saw a fox mask in the window. It seemed as if it came straight from Japan, where the hero lived before his rebirth in this world. The young man only had to protect the house from the cold. He could have used magic for this, but it would not have looked as elegant as he wanted. Later, the man decides to enter the smithy, where he sees a huge man working on something and apologizes for disturbing him. The bearded man looks at the young man and says he does not understand what a heater is and asks for an explanation again. The main character realizes that such technology should not exist in this world, so he starts making drawings to show what the device should look like, which surprises the blacksmith because of the unusual design. The man asks what the budget for making the heater is. The young man replies that if the limit exceeds 100 gold coins, then it is acceptable. The blacksmith informs them that they will use Gran's ore. This is a special ore mined in the Gran's volcano. It is very fire-resistant and has a fairly moderate price. Making the new device will take 3 days. Of course, it can be made from iron, but then the heater will not last long. The young man says they have an agreement. The boy asks the name of his new friend, and he, remembering that he did not introduce himself, says his name is Garvens, but it is okay to just say Gar, and the boy responds by calling him that. The young man thinks the day was long, but passed unnoticed. He believes that the products ordered for the banquet should have already been delivered. The youth realizes that, as expected from a duchy, the goods are of the highest quality. During these 2 days, he should try to surprise the young duchess. The next morning, all the servants began to prepare, first making appetizers, and the main dishes were cooked in the afternoon. Everyone exceeded their tasks and managed to prepare everything on time, only waiting for the celebration remained. On the night before the celebration, when everyone had already gone to sleep, 3 men in black cloaks ran through the manor yard, and a maid let them into the house, saying everything was clear. The men decided to act quickly before anyone noticed them, so they went to the kitchen and approached the refrigerator where the dishes for tomorrow's birthday were stored. Throughout the palace echoes a cry calling the lord of the village, and the young man sees cooks running to him saying that trouble has occurred and something terrible. The boy runs into the kitchen and sees devastation there. Pots and ingredients are scattered all over the room. Everything is covered in dust and dirt. The boy looks at one of the cooks and says that a horror has happened because everything was fine yesterday and asks what happened here. An adult man says that thieves broke into the kitchen at night. This causes great surprise on the main character's face. The cook confirmed that the door was opened from the inside. Before going to bed, experienced guards were placed in the kitchen, but all of them suddenly fell asleep at the same time, and the maid hired the day before the ball suddenly disappeared. A worker of the ducal house continues to say that someone wanted to ruin the ball. There is no doubt about it. The young man asks what the damage is. The man replies that besides food and ingredients, the dishes and all the alcohol were destroyed. The young man realizes that this is a complete failure. The ball in honor of the eldest daughter of the Adams Duchy will take place very soon, and they have neither food nor drinks, and even as a commoner, he understands the horror of this situation. But then the boy stops worrying, gathers his thoughts, and asks Mr. Albus. He urgently needs eggs, milk, dishes, and alcohol. He says everything must be delivered within an hour. The young man tells all the cooks to gather because there is still time, It is only 6 in the morning, and the ball will start at midnight, and the cooks are stunned because there are no main ingredients. The young man stretches out his hands in front of him, and suddenly, before the stunned servants, all the necessary ingredients begin to appear as if out of thin air. The main character repeats that the ingredients are his responsibility and hopes that the Addams family workers remember the recipes, and the chef says that of course they will be able to prepare everything. He recalls that there were hunting supplies in the storage just in case, but there is no other choice, so they will have to use them and cook with what they have. He orders the cooks to get to work. They obediently send the servants for ingredients, and then together, synchronously and amicably, begin to cut the products for the upcoming celebration. The chefs, who have worked for years in this respected house and honed their skills, begin to prepare dishes and then skillfully arrange them on plates. The young man watches everything, but then complains that no matter how hard they try, they manage to cook the meat. He hopes to find a way to reduce the cooking time. The main character sees something resembling a black baking tray, takes it in his hands, and says that this is the solution to all their problems. The next second the boy says he will take on all the meat dishes. The chef does not understand how he will cook all these dishes himself and says he will not have time. The young man promises to show his colleagues a new cooking method at the ball today and asks them not to be distracted in the meantime. Suddenly, Mr. Albus runs into the kitchen, calls the young man, asks how things are, and says he managed to buy eggs and milk, but could not get alcohol and dishes because they were sold out everywhere. The main character asks who could have bought everything, as it is strange that everything was sold out in one evening, and the butler says that everything was purchased by the trading company Saikyou, which has business relations with the Falali family. The young man explains that the person recently found unconscious near his house was a member of this family. The butler confirms this, and the young man suggests that this might be revenge on the Addams duchy. The boy thinks that all this looks like one big trap, and that soon merchants will appear before them. Then a servant runs into the kitchen and asks Mr. Butler to leave the house because merchants from the trading company have arrived. The young man informs Mr. Butler that he will go with him to talk to the guests who have arrived, and then addresses the chef and says that he leaves the kitchen management to him. 3 people enter through the main doors of the estate. They are surprised that the senior butler himself met them. They say that today is Mrs. Alice's birthday, but they suddenly ran out of food, dishes, and alcohol. Standing behind the footman, the young man clicked and realized that now everything had fallen into place, and concluded that the filial family, which rivals the Addams family, was involved in this. The boy whispered his plan into Mr. Albus's ear, and he asked if they were really representatives of the Sahasi Trading Company and waited for their confirmation. In a second, the butler says that everything is in order. They are also told that they do not need the goods of these merchants. This greatly surprises the 3 men. Later, the gray-haired man returns and says to look for clients elsewhere. This outrages the people who came to them, and they say that the estate residents will regret this. The uninvited guests return and leave through the same front doors they came in. The butler looks at the young man and says he did what he asked, and the young man says not to worry because soon everything will become clear. Suddenly, both heroes hear someone coming down the stairs. It is one of the servants of the Adam house, who loudly calls the head butler. The employee reports that this time, a representative of the Lebrant trading house has come to them. This stunned the butler. He saw baskets of food and drinks appearing before him one after another. The gray-haired man asked how he could have known that this would happen. The young man replied that Mr. Lebrun is his very good friend, so he asked him for a favor. I suspected he would need help. The butler asks if the young man knew that this could happen, and he replies that he was just being cautious, nothing more, but complains that he could not get the necessary alcohol. The young man says that he recently decided to try making his own wine, which he carefully placed in a woven basket, and offers the butler to try it. The man replies that it is quite strange because he is still young enough to drink alcohol, but still decided to make it. Then the young man gives him a glass of the drink. The head servant in the house says that the wine has a very rich taste, so now they will buy it wholesale, and the young man says he agrees to such a generous offer and claims that they have made a deal. Men who previously tried to sell things in this house do not know what to do now, because the young gentleman said to wait just a few minutes, and people from this estate will run up to them. Suddenly, a man in a mask addressed the 3 merchants and said he would buy all their goods. They did not understand who he was. He explained that if they did not sell the goods, the ingredients would spoil quickly. The man in the mask says he will buy everything from them for 100 gold coins. The merchants are outraged and say this is robbery in broad daylight because all these goods are worth about 30,000 gold coins. The stranger says that he personally does not care how much money they demand, but the count gave them money, and it would be pointless if they returned to him with nothing at all. The young man enjoys the outraged faces of the merchants. They begin to bargain, offering 10,000 gold coins for all the goods, but he succeeded and finally set the price at 300 gold coins. The strange man in the mask simply assumed they would agree, but in reality they borrowed from Count Falil as a sum, and the men who called themselves merchants began to walk heavily to the exit, not knowing what to do next. The main character turns out to be under the fox mask. He realizes that the ball will start soon, so he returns to the kitchen. The kitchen is full of life. Everyone is trying to prepare the stolen dishes. The boy runs into the workroom and apologizes to everyone for making them wait. People come up and say they thought Mr. Asul had completely abandoned them, and this confuses the boy. The young man asks how things are. The cook replies that everything is ready and displayed in the hall, except for the meat dishes. Someone promises to take care of them immediately, then removes the tablecloth from an unusual device. The boy puts a piece of meat on a homemade stove. It immediately starts to rumble. The cook asks what kind of new cooking method this is, and the boy confirms it. He calls this cooking method live cooking because he prepares dishes right in front of the guests, who come closer and closer to see something new. The main character puts the mask on his face and thinks he must hide his identity. A crowd of guests invited to the young lady's birthday begins to gather around him. He puts a second piece of meat on the stove. The next second, the young man uncorks a bottle of his own wine and pours the wine directly onto the meat, after which a high flame rises. Then he announces that the first steak is ready, and immediately a queue forms behind it. A clamor of voices rises because everyone wants to try it first. The young man's hands bustle over the new device. He quickly fries the meat so that everyone gets a piece, but then Kadir's voice is heard saying that the guest of honor has arrived. A girl in a beautiful lush dress begins to descend the stairs, attracting the attention of all the gathered guests. But the girl is momentarily distracted and looks at what is happening in the center of the banquet hall, where the main heroine stands and fries meat on an unusual device she had not seen before. The next moment, the eldest daughter from the Adam house raises her hand to her new acquaintance, with whom she has long been friends, and he responds with the same gesture. In their thoughts, everyone begins to complain that, of course, they had difficulties, but overall everything went well. The main character heard that many people asked the maids where they got so much delicious food, but they calmly said that only the chief butler knows, and Mr. Albus is not the type to reveal it to others. The hero looks at the butler, tired from the long preparation and the problems that arose, and thinks that Albus can be relied upon to keep the secret. The boy notices that desserts were especially popular at the party. They were gone in the blink of an eye. The highlight of the evening was a cake specially made for the birthday girl. She had the honor of taking the first bite. The birthday girl really liked the cake. After the girl brings a piece of cake to her mouth and swallows it, she says it is very tasty, and tears of pleasure appear in her eyes. The girl shyly looks at the main character, quietly utters his name, and sincerely thanks the one who arranged such a wonderful birthday for her. The man congratulates the eldest daughter of the Adams family on her birthday and begins to clap his hands, which is later picked up by all the guests, and so the evening in the duchy ended. It was already night, the guests had left the estate, and the party was over. The young man decides to sit and rest on the sofa in one of the house's halls. Then the butler approaches him. The gray-haired man says that the village worked well today, and the village replies that Lord Albus also worked well. Then they discuss payment, taking into account all merits for cooking and help in organization. Here the butler informs that the amount is about 300 platinum coins and asks if the young man agrees to such money. The family also commits to paying a fine if at least one recipe is disclosed. He mentally calculated that 300 platinum coins amount to 300 million yen and considers this sum too large. The chief servant of the house assures that the recipes will indeed change their diet, and this amount also includes compensation for the stressful situation caused by the competing family. The butler also reports that the lord of the house really liked the wine that the young man made and says that they still have 5 barrels left, but the master wants to buy 10 more from him. The young man's gaze becomes cunning in a second. He thinks that this is a good idea because they want to buy the wine he made, and it is quite a profitable deal. The man smiles happily and says that since they liked his wine, there is no point in refusing them the purchase, and the butler rejoices at his words and says that he made the right choice. So literally in one evening, the young man became incredibly rich and received a steady income. He thinks that having a connection with the duchy is convenient. The next day, the villagers lined up in front of the ducal family. The head said that today he is leaving them. They were grateful for everything he had done for them and assured that if he got into trouble, their family would always help him. The lady from the Adams family reports that his desserts were incredibly delicious, so she asks him to come and cook as soon as he has free time. They also said that his wine is very tasty. Alice says that Albus told her what the young man had to go through before her birthday, but she is glad that he coped completely and is very grateful to him for the celebration they arranged for her. The girl sadly lowers her head and says that it is time for him to go. The boy does not understand why the eldest daughter of the Adams family is so upset. His new girlfriend places her hand on her chest and cannot start a conversation at all. She asks the hero for permission to fulfill her wish. The boy says he is leaving, but can still prepare something sweet for the girl if she wants. The girl, of course, agrees to such a generous offer. The little woman takes the man's hand, squeezes it tightly, and promises that as soon as her cookies are ready, she will definitely come to visit him. Albus comes out to say goodbye to the young man, thanks him for his work, and asks what he plans to do, and the man replies that he does not know because he had no special plans and asks for advice. The butler asks for a few seconds to think and says that he usually does not offer this because the activity is not suitable for everyone, but considering the main hero's abilities, does he want to go to the labyrinth? The words of the butler greatly surprised the young man. Strange images of some cave with bones and skulls flashed through his mind, and it seemed to him that it was some kind of labyrinth. There are about 108 labyrinths in Archeria. These are special dungeons teeming with monsters. Despite the danger, ancient treasures can be found there. Many risk it for profit. Near the capital, there is Labyrinth number 4. They are numbered from 1 to 10 by difficulty, currently with 53 floors open. Only people over 15 years old and those who have an adventurer's license can enter the labyrinths, but Albus came there with the main hero and stood up for him, so he was allowed in. A young man found himself before a gigantic road, as if carved inside a giant rock. The young man picked up the first sticky saw from the floor, considering it his weapon, and thought he should check how far he could go. On every 5th floor of the labyrinths stands a mini-boss who always guards something valuable. The hero hopes to defeat not just a few of them. The young man begins to cast a spell, focuses and calls upon his inner strength, invoking spells for body strengthening, detection, presence concealment, and spatial vision. After the boy finished working with magic, he starts running toward his goal and shouts that he is moving forward. Moving through the labyrinth, the hero faces the first trial. These are strange inhabitants of the stone walls in the form of slugs. He deals with them using a stick he picked up at the beginning of the cave. The main hero realizes that, as he thought, the enemies on the first floors are quite easy, so he manages with one stick and thinks he should continue fighting in the same spirit. After 4 levels, the young man reaches the 5th floor to the room of the main boss, who turns out to be a creature resembling a mountain troll with a huge sword at his side. The young man looks at the one who appeared before him. It is a huge goblin, and the crown on his head suggests that he is the king of goblins. He begins to shout at the boy. The boy gathers all his strength, extends his hands forward, and releases magic in the form of a water spear, which hits the opponent right in the chest. After the strike, only dust remains around the field where the battle took place, but the young man understands that the fight is not over, takes a fighting stance, and asks the opponent to attack him. As soon as the smoke from the mutual powerful blows cleared, the main hero sees that only the crown remains from the goblin, which now lies alone on the cave stone. Everything that is happening greatly surprises the young man. He finds it strange how easily everything worked out for him. He believes that on the top 10 floors, he will not encounter any intelligent opponents. After defeating the monster, the young man with a joyful sparkle in his eyes sees a chest in the corner of the cave and approaches it, and upon opening the chest, finds a white pouch inside. Peeking into the bag he won, the young man finds small seeds of an unknown plant and pours them into his palm. The boy shakes off the grain a little disappointedly and thinks that this labyrinth is a granary for peasants, although he himself is also a peasant. After defeating the monster on the 5th floor, the young man climbs to the 6th and sees before him a large, peaceful field surrounded by tall mountains. The boy raises his head and realizes that although he is underground, the sky is visible here and a different atmosphere is felt. He thinks that every 5 floors the environment will change. The clearing where the main character found himself reminds him of his native village, which he left not so long ago. If you think about it, he hasn't let it out of his mind since the day he arrived in the city. The young man releases the enchanting little bee from his embrace, names her Quinn, and commands her to fly freely. The bee returns to the young man as if greeting him and turns out to be much larger than an ordinary insect. Some spirit asks it to sit on his shoulder and says that he is also very glad to see her. To tell the truth, the young man thought about leaving his beloved insect in the village, but she categorically refused, and he had to take her with him. The young man says he is going to go even deeper and asks if Quinn will go with him. She replies that she wants to fly here, so he says he will meet her later and asks her to be careful. Slowly but surely, the young man reached the 10th floor. He enters the monster's room, where creatures resembling werewolves are located. Then he begins to fight them. After the victory on this floor, a piece of fabric falls on the young man. He picks it up and realizes that it is an item from the boss. It turns out to be a cloak. He wraps himself in it, sees a new chest, approaches, and opening the lid finds seeds inside. Then the young man immediately climbs to the 11th floor and finds himself in a swampy place where the bright sun is not visible. On the 12th and 13th floors, the boy is in even greater danger than before, so he confirms his words that the lower he goes, the stronger his enemies are. On the 15th floor in the boss's office, a strange transparent cloud suddenly appears, which begins to attack the village and from which tentacles grow. These appendages, which increase every second, try to grab the main character's stick, but the boy manages to dodge and says that the opponent is very fast. The boy has to jump very quickly from place to place because the monster moves very sharply. The young man realizes that this monster attacks with blows similar to a whip. Suddenly, the main character realizes that physical attacks on monsters of this type do not work at all. His stick does not harm this creature at all. The boy looks seriously at the monster attacking him and says that this is exactly the reaction he expected from the labyrinth journey, and it's a pity that such enemies appeared only on the 15th floor. The next second, the limbs began to attack the boy from all sides. The main character, preparing for a serious fight, easily deflects the monster's attacks and says that he is still not strong enough compared to it. The boy decides to use magic because physical attacks do not work. He flies up and summons a thunderstorm. Then clouds gather in the sky and lightning strikes the monster. The young man falls to the ground after such a strong attack. He took advantage of the fact that the lightning dispersed the mist, and there was no trace of the monster that was planned to be attacked. The young man looks at the dissipating fog and says that this creature seems to be unprotected from lightning strikes. With enviable zeal, the boy begins to rummage through the chest guarded by the monster. He believes that since the enemies have become stronger, the rewards must be better. The young man in the black cloak is very disappointed when he finds seeds again, although he is actually a farmer. Fighting monsters on the 16th floor, the boy still complains about the poor rewards in the dungeon chests. Even on the 17th floor, the main character does not understand why there are seeds there, although he thinks that everything is fine with them. Later, during the battle with creatures on the 18th floor, the young man still thinks that the chests create unreasonable expectations. Even while fighting on the 17th floor, the boy hoped that, after defeating a strong enemy, he would receive some treasure. Of course, he wants something cool for the winter. The monster on the 20th floor turns out to be a multi-winged eagle, and its fierce gaze is directed straight at the boy. The soul that begins to fight with him hopes that at least this time he will not be given seeds, since he protects and puts effort into caring for the corn, but they only laugh at him. But the hero tells the monster flying above him that it seems to control lightning, so he wants to check whose lightning is stronger and uses the spell Thunderstorm for this. The next second, the sky darkened and began to release lightning bolts that struck the eagle hard, which bent and tried to dodge. The eagle rises and stands at full height, which surprises the young man because it turned out that one of its abilities was to absorb spells. The eagle takes off, shining with sparks. A magical creature, with which a young man had to fight on the 15th floor, sends a lightsaber at him, and it is striking that he stands with his mouth open. The boy tries to raise the barrier quickly, raises his hands and covers his eye. The monster's spell hits his shield, which consists of several parts for greater strength. When the spell's effect disappears, the youth decides to use another magic and find out what the opponent thinks about him. A sphere of light appears in his open palm, around which lightning circles. The main character raises both hands and says that the Thunder Dragon must accept his challenge. From the magic that was in the youth's body, a huge magical creature begins to form. The young man orders the dragon, he just created from storm sparks, to rush at the enemy. The dragon obeys and fiercely flies at the eagle. The dragon, which the youth called for protection, wraps around the winged opponent and squeezes him with all its might, causing a scream to burst from the monster's mouth. The magical creature, together with its opponent, loudly falls to the ground and tears apart, forming a small crater. The next second, when the dragon almost defeated the eagle and at least immobilized it, the young man summons a stone chain that wraps around the opponent's entire body. The boy stands on a small hill above the opponent and says to him that now he will not escape from him. The instrument thinks that only the last blow remains, but it is distracted by a feather slowly falling from its right side. The young man carefully catches the falling feather by the tip examines it closely, and thinks that it is quite interesting. The young man remembers that the Goblin King dropped the crown on the fifth floor, and usually after victory, the monster's body completely crumbles to dust, but the eagle still had feathers. The main character carefully picks up all the remains of the wings and feathers of the bird he recently fought with, and happily continues his journey. Now he understood that if he kills the boss instantly, everything on his body will disappear, but if he weakens the boss or removes an item from his body, then after death it will not disappear, as happened with the feathers. When the young man realized this simple truth, he decided to return because there were many goblins on the previous floors, so he could kill them all, collecting meat with fangs, and then sell everything to the duchy. After a short break, a decent catch appears before the boy, consisting of claws, fangs, feathers, and several pieces of meat. The young man wipes the sweat from his forehead, and in a moment says that he managed to collect 100 kilograms of selected meat at once, and now knows how to fight monsters and profit from it. The main character says he is ready to forgive the labyrinth if he sees seeds there again. He remembers that he is now on the 16th floor, so he decides to return for his bee and go down. A sudden loud sound, resembling a scream, distracts the village from the peaceful continuation of the path and causes surprise. The young man understands from experience that the scream in the silence of the thicket was human, so he starts running in the direction from which it came. Running out onto a clearing where a fight is taking place, the boy sees that some knight in armor is fighting huge orcs and their small servants, and nearby lies a girl who looks like a cat. As the boy passes between the trees, a better view opens before him, and he realizes that he has found himself on a clearing where monsters and adventurers are fighting, giving their last strength. The young man sees that a group of adventurers is fighting before him, but they have already been completely defeated, and the strength of the last knight still standing is almost exhausted. A second later, he notices the girl with cat ears. She squints, looks ahead as if seeing nothing, and asks who is in front of her. The main character puts on a fox mask, which he used a few days ago for the Merchant Guild, and believes that his stealth skills have reached a new level, but still thinks it is worth wearing his attribute. The girl lying on the ground looks at the boy with a very exhausted gaze, with bruises under her eyes, and although she does not know who she is talking to, she asks for help. Looking around, the young man counted everyone and decided that there were 4 in the group. 3 can no longer fight. Their leader is barely standing on his feet. The young man starts running to help everyone, because if he does nothing, the stranded travelers will remain in this labyrinth forever and die. The main character runs forward and stands to protect the young man who is barely standing. All the monsters attack him. When the soul begins to create magic and summons lightning bolts in his hand, the boy he is hastily protecting asks him who he is. A thunderstorm falls on the orcs and trolls who were already about to attack the young man, which they had previously summoned, and because of this the monsters are frying, standing in place. The blonde, who almost died, is very surprised that his protector uses such a spell without chanting. It also causes huge damage. The monsters began to fall. The main character sees that after his sparkling attack only one survivor remains, a red ogre, who is approaching him extremely fast and roaring loudly. The boy takes a fighting stance, leans forward slightly, and says that he used a fairly strong spell, but the creature turned out to be much stronger than the others. It begins to attack the village. Raising his hand, the man in the black cloak begins to pronounce a new spell and says he will show the ogre something new in lightning magic, and a trident begins to grow above his head. The young man shouts a spell that sounds like a sparkling spear. Then he moves his hand and points it at his huge opponent. A magical fly flies straight at the opponent, then hits him right in the center of the forehead, and his head splits in half. This act causes the adventurers watching to show undisguised surprise, because they have never seen such a high level of mastery of such powerful magic before. A spear of sparkling lightning pierces the huge monster. It falls on its belly, and a huge hammer falls out of it, the roar of which spreads throughout the vicinity. The main hero looks from above at everything happening and says that the ogre, of course, lasted a little longer, but he is still far from this, and the monsters from the sacred mountain were much stronger. 2 adventurers, whom the young man observing all this does not know, say that she is saved, and allow themselves to relax because the threat is gone. The blonde knight who tried to fight to the end, covering his eyes, thanks the young man, says he is glad for his help, whoever he may be, and then pays attention to his comrades. The stranger runs up to his unconscious friends and asks them to hold on, says that the monsters are defeated and they can safely return to the surface. The main hero looks at the scene and realizes that 3 of the 4 in the team are barely breathing, and the leader with such wounds will not be able to lead everyone out, so he decides to help. The young man raises his hands again and begins to recite a general healing spell. after which all 4 adventurers who previously fought the ogres begin to regain consciousness. The knight with light hair looks at his hands, which were previously wounded, says that the cuts have completely healed, then turns his head and sees that their savior is starting to run away quickly. The rescued man in armor catches up with them near the village and asks them to stop and say their name so that he knows whom to thank for saving his team from the ogres. For a moment the main hero thinks and realizes that if he does not answer, the man may chase him and his friends will soon wake up. The young man in the black cloak says that his name is Ona. The boy immediately moves away from the group of people he saved and runs into the depths of the forest. The main character hears his new acquaintance thanking him, saying that they are a group called Shining Wing, and adds that they will definitely repay him for his help in the future. Fleeing without looking back at the new acquaintances, he realizes that this was his first encounter with the Shining Wing, a future famous elite group of C-rank adventurers. The man climbs to the 10th floor, where he previously left his favorite. He believes he has already done one good deed today, but it is already quite late, and that is enough for him. The young man begins to call Quinn his favorite bee, but a whole swarm of the same bee, resembling his insect, flies to him. The main character was very surprised by what he was shown. He says that Quinn found a local bee nest and defeated their leader, so she is considered the new queen of the bees. The instrument shyly smiles and is happy that thanks to his favorite, he will collect much more honey. After a few weeks, the main character returns to the duchy, to my home, where he decides to make himself a rocking chair and finishes this work without any problems. The young man is glad that from the feathers of the monster he defeated on the 15th floor of the labyrinth, he made soft pillows and from them made himself a chair. The hero is confident that this is the most comfortable thing for rest and calls it wonderful. The pillow is placed on the backrest of the chair and on the seat. This provides maximum comfort. After returning from the labyrinth, the soul learned that the multi-winged bird he defeated was a thunder eagle, a rank monster, and its feathers and meat are highly valued on the market. With a satisfied and relaxed expression, the young man thinks that the project and making of the chair took about a week, but it was worth it. He believes he can sell his design profitably. But before applying for a patent, the main character decides to clean up the mess he made while designing a new piece of furniture for himself. The boy looks around the room and says that, honestly, it is quite difficult to live alone in such a house, and even if he cleans up, this house will become messy again. The young man claps his hands. Joy appears in his eyes because he decided to simply hire someone and is thinking about a housekeeper. To carry out his plans and make sure his decision was right, the boy realizes that he needs the opinion of an informed person. After some time, the villager is already sitting at a friend's place and asking for his help, while Mr. Lebrant enthusiastically examines the rocking chair he invented. The adult man rocks in the chair and says that the main character has reinvented something incredible. Sitting in this chair is pleasant, the rocking soothes. He would like to have one at home. The boy's friend quickly approaches close to his face and says that he is very happy to pay for this miracle. The interlocutor says he understands, but asks to return to the topic of conversation. Mr. Lebrant insists that regarding the maid, it is better for the young man to buy her than to hire, and with these words, he surprises the boy. The man says that the young man needs to buy a slave to satisfy all his needs and demands not only in everyday life, but also during travels. This will be especially important for him because the village itself is a special entity that hides many things from others, and the slave has no right to go against his master. He is only useful for household chores. The main character, of course, knew that slavery was quite common in the world he ended up in after reincarnating from a resident of Japan, but he never even thought about buying a slave. Mr. Lebrant says that this is the best option for the boy, and since he is a minor, an adult will become his guarantor during the purchase, and the boy thanks him for this. From the friend's words, the boy understands that if he also takes on household chores, there will be no one to create new things for the friend's trading house, so it is much easier for the man to help him. The main character and his old friend approach a 3-story building that houses a shop owned by the best human trafficker in the capital. Mr. Lebrant says he informed the owner about the young man's visit, so the young man only needs to tell the owner about his preferences. The owner will select a suitable option for him, and the boy thanks the man. The young man finally meets the man his friend recommended. He clarifies the purpose of the visit and specifies the requirements he has for his future servant. The boy says he has minimal requirements. The slave must be able to do housework, and he plans to start a career as an adventurer in the future, so an ambitious companion would be helpful. The young man puts his hand to his face and awkwardly says he wants to find a man about his age, preferably female, and the owner writes down all the requirements so as not to miss anything later. The new equations report that he understood everything and does not know if his friend told the young man, but those who lost in gambling, have no lineage, and have a bad character are not taken into slavery, so the young man can be calm. The shop owner leads the main character to an improvised stage and says he will introduce him to each candidate according to his criteria. The marketplace visitor is a bit nervous. 7 girls appear before the young man. 5 of them are humans. There is also a dog person and a cat person. The young man listens to their skills, ages, and names, then makes a final decision. The owner asks what Mr. Atal thinks about the girls he has seen. If he likes someone, he can talk to her personally. The man says he wants to talk to 3 slaves. The 4th slave is invited to the conversation first. The boy introduces himself and says his name. The girl thanks him for allowing her to speak personally with the young man. The main character says he wants to find a person who will take on house chores and then not be afraid to become a traveler and go with him into the labyrinth. The girl apologizes and complains that the hero is probably wondering why she has no right eye and left hand. She assures that this does not affect her duties and that she is ready to become an adventurer. The boy is glad that she is determined. He says that he is only 10 years old and hopes that his age will not embarrass her. He also wants to enter the Magic Academy this spring, so he will be very busy. Slave number 4 says that she sees no problem with his real age and that she graduated from the Magic Academy, so she will be able to help him study there. The young man closes his eyes and thinks that the girl, although she has lost a lot, is still talented, and with her he can easily enter the academy. Slave number 6, named Maran, was the next to agree to speak and immediately asked where Mr. Azul was from, which stunned the young man. The boy understands that the girl took him for a nobleman, and he says that he is an ordinary commoner, but he cannot blame the dog person for the mistake and thinks that he disappointed her a little. Slave number 7, named Yomi, promises that she is ready to take on all the household duties and accompany the main character during his adventures. If he buys her, he will not regret it for a second. The young man thinks that the girl is really attractive, tells her that he is an ordinary commoner and asks if she minds, and she replies that she will serve him, although she was not before. After meeting the last candidate, the young man says that she is very capable and kind, and that he has no hidden intentions towards her. The seller approaches the hero from behind and asks whom he will choose, and the boy, embarrassed, says that he has already decided. After a short thought, the soul says that he is buying the 4th and 7th slaves because he likes them more for their qualities. After a short manipulation, the shop owner announces that the deal with the slave owner has been successfully completed, and now the main character is the legal owner of 2 girls. The boy and his 2 companions walk through the shopping streets, on both sides of which are shops with various goods, to his house. While they are walking, the boy is fussing because he still bought slaves and has no idea what to do with them. 2 girls who were walking a little behind suddenly approach the main character and ask if he is okay because he has been in a daze for too long. The young man shouts that he is fine, but thoughts are spinning in his head that he needs to prepare because what is done cannot be undone, and he has already become their master, so if anything happens, they will manage. The boy leads them to his 2-story mansion and says that they are in place. He asks the 2 new girls to feel at home in his modest estate. The slave girls cannot stop admiring the beauty of their new home. As soon as the 10-year-old boy and his new servants find themselves in the living room, which the boy is so proud of, he stands before the strangers and says that they should introduce themselves to each other once again. The boy bows carefully, closing his eyes, and says that his name is Sewell. Such respectful behavior unexpectedly shocks the girls, who were not used to it before. The slave without an eye and a hand tells him that the young man should not respect them too much because others might criticize him. The boy complains that he did not know about this because he did not receive an aristocratic education and politely asks them to introduce themselves once again. Slave girl number 4 says that she has no name, so the young man can call her whatever he wants. She is good at household chores and knows how to fence. Slave girl number 7 says that her name is Yomi. She can do housework and also understands observation and knows how to use a dagger. The last girl smiles and confidently says that she is also good at adult pleasures. In a second, he declares that he can show his skills tonight. Here the first slave girl intervenes in the conversation and embarrassedly shouts at her friend that as long as she is here, she will not allow her to do various indecent things with the master. Observing the quarrel of the girls with whom he will have to live for a long time, the young man awkwardly realizes that, it seems, they will get along with each other. The young man decides to come up with a name for the blonde slave girl, notices her light hair, which especially shines in the moonlight, so he calls the girl Moon. Summing up, the main character told the 4th slave girl that from now on her name is Luna and asked if she agreed with it. This slightly embarrassed his companion. The girl smiles brightly, with tears in her eyes, and says that on the contrary, she is very touched to finally have such a beautiful name. The instrument was very surprised that Luna was so upset and cried because of the new name. He understands that it was really hard for her before. He laughs a little, then suggests discussing the details of their further cooperation over dinner. The girls set the table for their master, bringing the young man to a stupor, sitting by his feet and on his lap. The boy closes his eyes and looks attentively at his servants. The main character does not understand what is happening and asks his slaves what they are doing. The blonde replies that they are happy to sit on the leftovers of his food because he prepared so much, and it is not surprising because his body is young. The young man smiles, realizing that he has again encountered the oddities of this world. He says that he set this table for his servants as well because he decided to celebrate their first joint dinner. At first the girls were very surprised by this news and even gaped. Then the girl with chestnut hair jumped up and said that since the mistress prepared the food, she does not dare to refuse. Both slaves sit at the table, but Luna does so more hesitantly because they were not taught this way, and Yomi does not understand why refuse if their new master decided to indulge the heroines today. The girls try the first pieces of the festive dinner, shyly smile, and say that they have not eaten anything so tasty for a long time, so they cannot hold back their emotions from this pleasant taste. When the slaves eat, the man begins to explain why he decided to buy them. He says he has many secrets, so he does not want to hire servants, and he also needs to keep the house clean. They say the young man continues that at the first meeting he said he would visit the labyrinth from time to time and would like to take them with him, and in the spring, he plans to enter the Academy of Magic and would be glad if they help him with admission. Lyuda asks what secrets the boy is hiding and whether girls can find out about them because he mentioned them recently.